Vivian Sterling picked up her wine glass, looked at the waiter standing beside her table, and laughed. Not a polite laugh. A slow, deliberate one, loud enough for every powerful person in that room to hear. "Does your daughter tell her friends that her daddy carries plates for billionaires?" The room went quiet, and the man holding that wine bottle set it down, slowly, carefully, like a man who had been waiting 6 years for exactly this moment. What happened next didn't just silence a billionaire. It brought down an empire. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in stories like this one, subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. He had been invisible for 6 years. That was not an accident. That was the job. Caleb Morgan had learned early on, within his first week inside Harrington's, Chicago's most exclusive private dining establishment, that the best waiter is the one the guests never truly notice. You pour the wine before the glass is empty. You replace the bread before anyone asks. You read the room the way a conductor reads an orchestra, silently, precisely, from a distance. And you never, under any circumstances, make a guest feel like you are actually in the room with them. Because to them, you aren't. You are furniture with a heartbeat. Caleb understood that. He had accepted it. He had built an entire life around that quiet, steady invisibility. Because invisibility paid the rent, kept the lights on, and put food on the table for his daughter, Emma, who was 10 years old, and had her mother's eyes, and her mother's laugh, and her stubborn, beautiful way of tilting her head when she thought you were wrong about something. Emma was worth every plate he carried, every dismissive glance. Every evening spent on his feet for 9 straight hours while men who'd never worked a service job in their lives waved at him like he was a slow elevator. He was 41 years old, 6 feet tall, quiet-voiced and steady-handed. He kept his dark hair cut short and his uniform pressed tight because the one thing you could control in a room full of people who controlled everything else was how you presented yourself. His manager, Dale Hutchins, a small, nervous man, who had spent 22 years perfecting the art of managing up, had pulled Caleb aside before the event started that evening. "Tonight's different. Every night's different, Dale. I mean it this time. This is the Meridian Group dinner. Vivian Sterling is the guest of honor. You know who that is? I know who that is." Everybody knew who Vivian Sterling was. You couldn't open a business magazine without her face staring back at you. Forbes, Fortune, Wired. She had built Vertex Link, a global logistics technology company, from what the press referred to as a revolutionary vision and an iron will. She was 54 years old, worth approximately $14 billion, and was considered by many in the tech industry to be one of the most powerful private citizens in the country. She was also, by most accounts, someone you did not want to cross. "She has specific preferences," Dale said, scanning the clipboard in his hand, like it contained classified information. "The pomard goes first, not the Bordeaux, the pomard. No ice in the water. She will not ask twice for anything. If she has to ask once, that is already a failure on our part." "Understood," and Caleb Dale lowered his voice. "Stay invisible tonight." Caleb looked at him for a beat. "Always do." The private dining room on the 14th floor of Harrington's was something that regular people never saw and rarely imagined existed in a city like Chicago, where the wind came off the lake like a warning, and the old brick neighborhoods felt like they had been built by people who believed in permanence. Up here, permanence looked different, floor-to-ceiling windows, hand-poured candles on tables that cost more per square foot than most people's mortgage payments, paintings on the walls that were tastefully abstract and aggressively expensive. A guest list tonight that included 3 hedge fund managers, 2 U.S. senators, a former Secretary of State, a handful of CEOs whose companies employed more people than some small countries, and at the center of it all Vivian Sterling. She arrived at 7:14, 14 minutes late, which Caleb suspected was intentional. She wore a dark charcoal blazer and moved through the room the way powerful people learn to move, slowly, because the room adjusts to you, not the other way around. Her hair was silver and cut close. Her jawline was sharp. Her eyes were pale blue and moved fast, cataloging everything in the room in the time it took most people to say hello. She shook hands. She smiled at the right moments. She said things that made people laugh in that particular way, where the laugh was slightly nervous, slightly relieved, like someone who just realized a joke was directed at someone else. Caleb watched all of this from the service corridor. He had learned to read rooms. It was part of surviving in them. He read Vivian Sterling in approximately 45 seconds. Control, he thought. Every movement, every word, every pause. All of it deliberate. All of it designed. He had known people like her before. A long time ago. He pushed the thought down and picked up his tray. The first hour passed cleanly. He poured the pomade correctly. He replaced water glasses before they were empty. He cleared plates at the precise moment, when clearing felt natural and not intrusive. He moved through the room, like he was supposed to, like weather, present but unnoticed. The conversation at the main table was the kind that happened when people with enormous resources got together in private rooms, deals being circled without being named, alliances being tested through casual questions, ego being managed through the careful arrangement of seating and flattery. Senator Whitmore, a tall, gray-templed man, who had been in office long enough to perfect the art of seeming interested, leaned toward Vivian at one point and said something about the upcoming launch. The words Vertex Link, Meridian floated across the table. Vivian smiled. 12 days, she said, and then the industry changes. Again. The people at the table laughed appreciatively. Caleb refilled a water glass. He did not look up. But something tightened in his chest, the same quiet, distant tension that had been living in him for weeks. Ever since he'd read a particular technical brief buried in a tech industry newsletter that most people in his line of work would never have any reason to read. He breathed through it. He cleared a plate. He moved on. The mistake happened at 9:17. It was not Caleb's fault. The kitchen had sent up the wrong preparation on the duck for the guest at seat 4, a software executive named Gerald Chen, who had ordered it cooked through and received it pink. Gerald Chen did not complain loudly. He simply pushed the plate slightly to the left, which, in the language of a dining room like this one, meant this is wrong, and I expect it to be fixed without drama. Caleb noticed immediately. He was at the table in 30 seconds. He leaned in. Voice low. Mr. Chen, I apologize. I'm going to have that corrected for you right away. He lifted the plate. He took one step back from the table. And that was when Vivian Sterling noticed him for the first time. Not because of the plate. Not because of anything he'd done wrong. She noticed him, the way a certain kind of person notices something they've decided can be useful. The way a cat notices a mouse, not because it's hungry, but because movement triggers instinct. Her eyes tracked him, and then she spoke, not quietly, not privately, but at a volume that was clearly designed to carry. How long have you been doing this? Caleb paused. He turned toward her slowly. Around the table, conversations quieted. Heads turned. This was the particular gravity of Vivian Sterling when she spoke to someone. The room listened, because the room had learned that whoever she was speaking to was about to become, for better or worse, the center of attention. 6 years at this location, Caleb said, calm even. No, I mean, she tilted her head, and that small, practiced smile appeared. I mean in general. Waiting tables. How long have you been doing that? Something about the way she said that. The weight she put on it, the specific surgical distance she inserted between herself and the word. Long enough, Caleb said. A soft ripple of amusement moved around the table. Not quite laughter. Something more like anticipation. Vivian Sterling leaned back slightly in her chair. She was enjoying herself. You know, I always find it interesting, she said, loud enough that even the guests at the far end of the table had gone quiet to listen. When a man your age, what are you, 40? 45, is still in this phase. 41, Caleb said it. 41, she repeated it like it confirmed something. And you're good at this. I can see that. You move well. You're attentive. But don't you ever think about. She opened her hands, a small performative gesture of wonder. More? The table was completely silent now. Caleb stood with Gerald Chen's plate in his hand. He was aware of every eye in the room. He was aware of Dale, standing frozen near the service corridor entrance. He was aware of the specific quality of silence that had settled over the room, not uncomfortable, not yet, but charged. Waiting. He had been in enough rooms to know what was happening. He was being made into entertainment. "I think about a lot of things," he said. His voice was still level. "I'm sure you do." Vivian picked up her wine glass. "I'm just saying, a man with some intelligence, some capability, doesn't it seem like a waste? Carrying plates for people like us? People like us. 2 words. And in those 2 words, a wall ancient, invisible." Absolute went up between her side of the room and his. The table waited. Some of them looked almost sympathetic, the kind of sympathy that costs nothing. Caleb looked at Vivian Sterling directly. "No," he said, "it doesn't seem like a waste to me." She raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected a direct answer. She'd expected deflection or a nervous smile, or the particular cringing gratitude that powerful people sometimes elicited from people who depended on their good reviews. She got none of that. She decided to push further. "Tell me," she said, swirling her wine slowly, "does your daughter know what you do for a living? I mean, really know? Does she tell her friends that her father," a brief, bright pause, "serves billionaires for a living?" The room stopped breathing. Even Senator Whitmore, who had spent 30 years in rooms where calculate cruelty was called politics, looked down at his plate. That was the moment. That was the exact moment Caleb Morgan had not been planning, had not been preparing for, had not in 6 years of serving meals in this building ever expected to arrive. But it arrived, and something shifted in him, not anger. Not exactly, though anger was part of it. Something deeper. Something that had been compressed 4 years under the weight of grief, sacrifice, and the daily and sacrifice. And to a dignity over bitterness every single morning when he woke up and put on this uniform. He looked at Vivian Sterling. He set Gerald Chen's plate down on the table gently, precisely, with the same care he gave every action in this room. And then he straightened up, completely, not aggressively, not theatrically, just fully. Like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just decided, quietly and finally, to set it down. "You want to know about my daughter?" he said. His voice had changed. Not louder, not sharper, but different, the way a room changes when someone opens a window. "Sure," she said, smiling. She thought she had won. She thought this was the moment the waiter would crumble or stumble, or produce some sad, earnest answer she could dismiss with a gracious nod. "My daughter knows exactly what I do," Caleb said. "She knows I work hard. She knows I work with honesty. And she knows that the way you treat people, particularly people you think have nothing to offer you, is the truest measure of who you are." A beat. "So yes, she knows what I do, and she's proud of me." The smile on Vivian Sterling's face didn't disappear, but something behind it did. The room stayed quiet. Caleb picked up Gerald Chen's plate again. "I'll have this corrected in a few minutes, Mr. Chen." He walked toward the service corridor, and just before he reached the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. His back was to the room. His voice was low, but in that particular silence it carried perfectly. "Mock me one more time." He pushed through the door. The kitchen noise swallowed him whole. In the service corridor, Dale Hutchins was waiting with the expression of a man who had just watched a natural disaster and couldn't decide whether to run or take a photograph. What was that?" "That was me doing my job." "Caleb." Do you understand who she is?" "She could." "I know who she is, Dale." He said it without heat, without drama. He handed the plate through the pass to the kitchen and turned back toward the dining room. Dale grabbed his arm. "I'm serious. You can't talk to her like that." Caleb looked at the hand on his arm, then at Dale. Then he said, very quietly, "I didn't threaten her. I didn't raise my voice. I did my job and I told her the truth." A pause. "If that's a problem, you can talk to me about it after service." He went back into the dining room. The rest of the evening passed in a careful humming tension. Vivian Sterling did not speak to Caleb again. She laughed at other things. She made other people the center of her attention. She moved on the way that kind of person always moves on, smoothly, without acknowledgement, as if the moment had simply been reclassified as unimportant. Caleb served the rest of the meal. He poured the dessert wine. He cleared the final course. He stood near the service corridor and watched, with the practiced stillness of 6 years, as Vivian Sterling shook hands and smiled, and accepted compliments and made promises, and performed the elaborate ceremony of being Vivian Sterling. He watched her the way he had watched her 45 seconds after she walked in. And what he saw now was slightly different from what he'd read then. Because now she had looked at him, really looked at him. And somewhere in those pale blue eyes, underneath the performance, underneath the control, he had seen something flicker. Not recognition, not yet, but unease. She felt something, he thought. She doesn't know what, but she felt it. That meant something. He would have to decide carefully, deliberately, in the quiet of his apartment, after Emma was asleep, exactly what it meant. Because Vivian Sterling was 12 days away from launching a system built on technology that Caleb understood better than anyone alive. And Caleb Morgan had not spent 6 years carrying plates to stay invisible forever. He had been biding his time. He just hadn't known it yet. Until tonight. At 11:43, service ended. Caleb cleaned his station, changed out of his uniform in the staff locker room, and took the service elevator down to street level. The Chicago air hit him cold and honest, and straight off the lake, and he walked 3 blocks to where he'd parked his 10-year-old Civic. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, without starting the engine. He thought about Emma. He thought about the way she'd hugged him before he left, for work, quick and fierce, like she was trying to pack something important into a small space. He thought about what Vivian Sterling had said. "Does your daughter tell her friends that her father serves billionaires for a living?" He pulled out his phone. He opened a folder he hadn't opened in several months, a folder buried inside a folder, labeled with a date, nothing else. The date was from 15 years ago. Inside the folder were files, technical documents, design schematics, engineering records. His work, his original work. He scrolled through slowly, not reading, just remembering. The way you look through old photographs, not for information, but for feeling. Then he closed the folder. He started the engine. He drove home. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse suite, with a view of Lake Michigan that cost more per night than Caleb made in a month, Vivian Sterling stood at her window with a glass of cognac and thought about a waiter who had looked at her in a way that nobody had looked at her in a very long time. Not with admiration, not with fear, with something she couldn't quite name. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian Sterling went to sleep slightly uneasy. She didn't know why. She would. Emma was already asleep when Caleb got home. He knew she would be. It was past midnight, and she had school in the morning, and Emma Morgan was, unlike her father, someone who understood that rest was not surrender. She had learned that from her mother. A lot of the best things about her came from her mother. He stood in the doorway of her bedroom for a moment, just long enough. Long enough to hear her breathing, slow and even in the dark. Long enough to see the shape of her under the blankets, one arm thrown over her stuffed dog Chester, who had been her constant companion since she was 4, and had been repaired with Caleb's clumsy, somety stitching, times that Chester was now more patch than original fabric. Then he pulled the door closed softly, and went to the kitchen. He made coffee he didn't need, and sat at the table, and opened his laptop. The apartment was the particular kind of quiet that only exists after midnight, not peaceful, exactly, but honest. No performance to it. Just the hum of the refrigerator, and the distant sound of the city, and the screen in front of him and the thoughts he'd been holding at arm's length since he'd walked out of Harrington's service corridor. He typed 3 words into the search bar. Vertex Link Meridian launched. The results came back fast and dense. Tech publication, Business Wire releases, investor briefings. Feature profiles on Vivian Sterling that described her with the particular reverence that serious money tends to generate in people who cover serious money. Words like visionary and transformative and once in a generation appeared so often they had stopped meaning anything. He scrolled past all of it. He was looking for something specific. He found it 20 minutes in buried in the comment thread of a technical forum that most people in the industry would have dismissed as a backwater. A post from a username he didn't recognize, flagged 3 weeks ago, with 47 responses, most of them skeptical. The original post was long and precise, and written by someone who clearly understood what they were talking about. The post described, in careful technical language, a structural instability in the new Vertex Link Meridian routing architecture. The kind of instability that, under normal operating loads, would remain invisible. But under peak demand conditions, the kind that occurred regularly across major hospital supply chains, emergency transportation networks, and food distribution systems, the architecture had a failure cascade pattern that the poster described as not theoretical. "I've run the models," the post read. "This isn't a question of if. It's a question of when." Caleb read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. He knew that architecture. He knew it not because he had studied it, not because he had read about it, but because 15 years ago, sitting in a rented office in a building on West Monroe Street with second-hand furniture and a whiteboard covered in his own handwriting, he had built it, the original version, the version that had worked. He knew where the bones were, and he knew exactly which bones had been moved. His name, before everything changed, before the uniform and the silence and the 6 years of making himself invisible, inside other people's important evenings, had meant something in a very specific corner of the technology world. Caleb Morgan and a man named Raymond Cho had started a company together when they were both 26 years old, operating out of an idea so straightforward it was almost embarrassing that the logistics industry, the complicated, creaking, analog-dependent network of systems that moved goods from one place to another across the country was running on infrastructure that belonged in a museum. They weren't wrong. Raymond was the salesman, loud, funny, impossible to say no to, with the particular gift of making whatever he was selling sound not just useful but inevitable. He walked into rooms and made people feel like they had been waiting for exactly this solution without knowing it. Caleb was the engineer. Quiet, precise, capable of holding a complex system in his head, the way a chess master holds a board, not piece by piece, but as a living whole, every part in relationship to every other part. He could see failures before they happened. He could look at squination, know at an architecture with a certainty that was almost physical, where it would break under pressure. Together they built something called Freight Path Systems. It took 3 years. 3 years of 70-hour weeks and cheap coffee and arguments that lasted until 2 in the morning, and breakthrough moments that felt, in the middle of them, like standing at the edge of something enormous. 3 years of Raymond selling futures they hadn't quite built yet, while Caleb built the thing underneath Raymond's promises. And then it worked. FreightPath's core routing system, the architecture that Caleb had designed from the ground up, reduced logistics failure rates across their pilot clients by 63%. It predicted bottlenecks before they became crises. It rerouted supply chains in real time, automatically, with a precision that made their competitors look like they were still using paper maps. The industry noticed, investment came, a real office, real staff, real desks that hadn't been purchased at a thrift store. And then Sarah got sick. He didn't let himself think about that part of the story too often. Not because it hurt too much, although it did, in the particular way that real grief hurts, not sharp and immediate, but slow and structural. Like something deep in the foundation has shifted, and you only notice it years later when the walls start to crack, but because thinking about it too directly made him feel like he was performing sadness rather than carrying it. He carried it quietly. That was what he did with the hard things. Sarah had been 31. She had been a high school English teacher in Evanston who corrected Caleb's grammar when they first met and never fully stopped, and who laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, and who had, in the first months after Emma was born, sat in the rocking chair in the nursery at 3 in the morning and read to their infant daughter from whatever book she was teaching that semester, because she believed stories mattered even before you understood them. She had been the best person Caleb had ever known. The diagnosis came 8 months after FreightPath's second major funding round. Stage 3, aggressive. The treatment options were real but expensive, the kind of expensive that made even a successful startup founder's bank account look thin when you factored in the experimental protocols, the specialist fees, the costs that insurance found creative ways to decline. Raymond had come to him with the offer. They were both 33 by then. The company had real value. An acquisition had been on the table for months, a large logistic conglomerate that had seen FreightPath's numbers and wanted to absorb both the technology and the team. "We don't have to take it," Raymond said. "We can keep building. Another 2 years, we could be worth 3 times this." "What's the timeline on the offer?" 60 days. Caleb had thought about it for exactly one night. He told Raymond in the morning. "Take it." Raymond had looked at him for a long moment. "Caleb, I need liquidity. I need it fast. The offer is fair. Take it. You're going to walk away from—" "I'm not walking away from anything." A pause. "I'm walking toward something. There's a difference." Raymond had understood. He hadn't argued after that. He had done what he always did. He had made things happen. The sale closed in 44 days. Caleb's share of the proceeds went directly and almost entirely into Sarah's treatment. She lived for 2 more years. Emma was 4 when Sarah died. Caleb was 35, with a 4-year-old daughter and an apartment and a car and very little money and no company and no engineering career because the grief of the first year had made sustained technical work feel impossible, and because Emma had needed him present in a way that a demanding career could not accommodate. Dokun. And because somewhere in the process of watching Sarah fight and lose, Caleb had reorganized his internal hierarchy of values so completely that the things he had once cared about, deeply status, achievement, the particular satisfaction of building something impressive, had simply stopped mattering. What mattered was Emma. What mattered was showing up. He found the waiter job through a friend of a friend. The hours worked around Emma's school schedule. The money was enough. The work was physical and immediate, and had a clarity to it that Caleb, in a strange way, appreciated. You knew at the end of each shift exactly what you had done, and whether you had done it well. He did it well. He did it for 6 years, and he told himself, most mornings, that it was enough. What he had not known, what he had only begun to piece together in the last 2 months, as the industry buzz around the Vertex link. Meridian launch grew louder, was what had happened to FreightPath after the acquisition. The conglomerate that had purchased them had, over the following 3 years, sold the technology division in pieces. Standard corporate mechanics. The FreightPath routing architecture, Caleb's core system, had eventually been licensed to a mid-sized tech company. That company had been acquired. The acquiring company had been restructured. The technology had changed hands twice more, in ways that generated press releases, but not news stories. And then, approximately 4 years ago, it had landed at Vertex Link, Vivian Sterling's company. She had purchased the licensing rights and, according to everything Caleb had been able to read in the 2 months since he'd first heard Meridian's name in a context that made him sit up straight, had poured enormous resources into expanding the architecture, making it bigger, faster, more capable. She had also, in the process, modified the core routing logic, and the modifications, based on everything Caleb understood about the original system, was based on the bone-deep, cellular understanding of a man who had sat alone in a room for 3 months, building it. From first principles, were wrong. Not subtly wrong, not wrong in ways that only mattered under extreme edge cases. Wrong in ways that, under the right conditions, would produce exactly the kind of cascading failure that the anonymous poster on the technical forum had described. Wrong in ways that Caleb could see as clearly as a structural engineer sees a cracked, load-bearing wall, not because he was smarter than the engineers at Vertex Link, but because he had built the original, and you always know your own work better than anyone else knows it. The question that had been sitting in his chest all evening, through the service and the confrontation and the drive home, and now the coffee he hadn't touched, was not whether the system was dangerous. He knew it was dangerous. The question was what to do about it. He closed his laptop. He sat in the kitchen of his apartment in the particular midnight quiet and thought about a woman who had looked at him across a dinner table and decided, in front of some of the most powerful people in the country, that he was a thing to be amused by. He thought about her saying his daughter's name. Or not her name, her existence. The fact of his daughter, weaponized into a small, elegant cruelty. He thought about 12 days. Vertex Link Meridian launched in 12 days. And Caleb Morgan, who was invisible and nobody, and a waiter in a pressed uniform, who carried plates for people who didn't see him, was the only person in the world who knew exactly where the system would break. He went to bed at 2:15. He didn't sleep. In the morning, Emma came into the kitchen at 7:12 in her school uniform, with her hair still half uncombed and Chester tucked under one arm, which she was too old for, and absolutely refused to acknowledge. "You're still in your clothes. I was up late." She looked at him with that particular expression, her mother's expression, the head tilted slightly one that meant she was deciding how much to push. "Work stuff? Yeah. Bad night?" He got up from the table and started making her breakfast. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice from concentrate, because the real kind was $4 more, and $4 mattered. "Not bad," he said. "Just something I need to think through." She climbed onto the kitchen stool and watched him cook, with the comfortable, unself-consciousness of a child who had grown up in a home where watching a parent work was just what mornings looked like. "Dad, do you like your job?" He turned the eggs in the pan. He thought about how to answer that, honestly, without burdening her with things a 10-year-old shouldn't have to carry. "I like that it lets me be home when you need me," he said. "I like that I'm good at it. I like the people I work with." He paused. "Some of the people I serve are," another pause, "less enjoyable." "Someone was mean to you?" He plated the eggs, slid them across the counter toward her. "Someone tried to make me feel small," he said, "in front of a lot of people." Emma picked up her fork. She was quiet for a moment in the particular way she got quiet when she was actually thinking, rather than just waiting to speak another thing from her mother. "What did you do?" I told her the truth. "What truth?" "That you're proud of me." Emma looked up at him, and there was something in her face 10 years old, still half asleep, egg on her fork, that was so simply and completely serious that Caleb had to look away for a second. "I am proud of you," she said. "I know, I'd say it to anyone." "I know that too." She ate her eggs. He drank his coffee. The morning moved through the kitchen the way mornings do, quickly, a little relentlessly, indifferent to the fact that some of the moments inside it deserved to last longer. When she left for school, backpack over one shoulder, Chester staying home because she was 10 and had to maintain some dignity, she stopped at the door. "Dad, whatever you're thinking about doing," he raised an eyebrow. "You should do it," she said. "You always know what the right thing is. You just sometimes take a while to decide you're allowed to do it." She left. Caleb stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then he went to his bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled a box down from the top shelf. It was a plain cardboard box, taped shut, not heavy. He had moved it 3 times in 6 years and never opened it. He opened it now. Inside were printed documents, engineering schematics, the original freight path design files, printed and signed with dates Caleb Morgan, lead architect, going back 15 years. There were also USB drives, legal papers from the acquisition, correspondence. He sat on the edge of his bed and went through all of it. For 2 hours, he read his own past like someone else's story. Here was the original routing logic, laid out in his own handwriting on graph paper, clean and precise, the way it had looked before it became code. Here was the design review from month 7, where he had identified and corrected a potential cascade failure in the core load balancing function, the exact type of failure the forum post had described. Here was the note he had written himself at the bottom of that review, in pencil, which he had forgotten existed. "If this is ever modified without understanding the load distribution logic, the whole system fails under pressure. This is not a margin issue. This is structural." He held the paper for a long time. Then he went to his laptop and opened a new email. He addressed it to the public communications address for Vertex Link's engineering division, the only contact point he could find that wasn't designed exclusively to filter out messages exactly like the one he was about to send. He thought carefully about what to write. He was not a man given to drama. He did not want to make threats or accusations. He wanted to be precise, professional, and absolutely clear. He wrote, "My name is Caleb Morgan. I am the original architect of the freight path routing system, which I understand forms the core of the Vertex Link Meridian platform. I have reason to believe that modifications made to the load balancing architecture in the current build introduce a structural instability that will produce cascade failures under peak demand conditions. I am available to discuss the technical specifics with your engineering team." This is not a legal inquiry. This is a safety concern. I am asking you to delay the launch until the architecture has been reviewed by someone with full knowledge of the original design. Please respond at your earliest convenience." He attached a scanned copy of the original design review, including his handwritten note. He read the email 3 times. He sent it. Then he closed his laptop, changed his clothes, and went to work. Dale didn't mention the previous evening. That surprised Caleb slightly. He had expected at minimum a formal conversation, possibly a warning. But Dale moved through the pre-service briefing with his usual clipboard energy, and the only acknowledgement of anything unusual was a single moment. Near the end of the briefing, when Dale looked at Caleb for a half-second longer than necessary, and then looked away. Caleb took it as a neutral sign and got to work. The shift was a standard dinner service, a corporate event on the 12th floor, not the exclusive private dining room, with a guest list that was impressive without being extraordinary. Caleb moved through it the way he moved through all of them, steady, precise, invisible, in the way that good service is invisible. He poured wine. He cleared plates. He thought about the email sitting in a corporate inbox somewhere in a glass building he'd never entered. He thought about 12 days, 11 now. The response came 3 days later, not from an engineer, not from a technical review team, not from anyone at Vertex Link whose job title suggested they were the kind of person who read carefully worded safety concerns from qualified strangers and took them seriously. The response came from a law firm, Hargrove, Sterling & Associates. The letter sent to Caleb's personal email address, which he had included in his message in the particular way that expensive lawyers are when they are doing something that is not polite. It thanked him for his correspondence. It noted that Vertex Link's engineering teams were world-class and that the Meridian platform had undergone extensive testing and review. It further noted, in language that started to become less polite, in the 3rd paragraph, that any claims regarding intellectual property, proprietary architecture, or the technical specifications of Vertex Link products were matters that would need to be directed to legal counsel, and that any attempt to disseminate unverified technical claims about Vertex-linked products to third parties, including media outlets, investors, or regulatory bodies would be addressed appropriately under applicable law. Caleb read it twice. He saved it to a folder. He sat for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called the only person in the world who would fully understand what the letter meant, what it was designed to do, and what Caleb's options were. Raymond Cho picked up on the 3rd ring. Caleb Morgan. Raymond's voice had the same quality it always had, warm, immediate, like someone who was genuinely glad to hear from you and didn't need any time to get there. It has been what, 4 months? Something like that. How's Emma? She's good. She's great. She's still reading everything in sight. She finished the Percy Jackson series last month and has opinions about it. Raymond laughed. That's her mother right there. A pause, and the brief, comfortable silence that the mention of Sarah always produced between them, respectful, not heavy. What's going on? You sound like you're thinking. I've been thinking for 3 days. That's never casual. Talk to me. So Caleb talked. He told Raymond everything: the Meridian platform, the architecture he'd recognized, the forum post, the email he'd sent, and the legal response that had arrived in return. He kept it ordered and clear. The way he organized everything technical, moving from observation to evidence to conclusion, without editorializing. Raymond listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to mean Raymond was doing what he always did when the situation was serious, actually thinking before he spoke. Okay, Raymond said finally. First question, are you certain about the architecture failure? Yes, not pretty sure, not I think, certain. I built the original system, Ray. I know where every load balancing decision came from and why it was made. What they've done to the routing logic, the modification they've introduced in the Meridian. Build it removes the safety buffer I designed into the original cascade prevention protocol. Under normal load, you'd never see it, but under peak demand. It fails. It fails the same way a bridge fails, not gradually, all at once. Another silence, and you sent this to them. I sent it to them, and they sent you a letter from a law firm. From Hargrove Sterling and Associates. Raymond made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Sterling, as in Vivian Sterling's family firm? Caleb hadn't looked that up. He looked it up now, on his laptop, while Raymond stayed on the line. Hargrove Sterling and Associates. Founded 1987. Senior partner, Richard Sterling. Vivian Sterling's brother. Yeah, Caleb said. Okay. Raymond's voice had shifted, the warmth was still there, but something harder was underneath it now. Raymond Cho had spent 20 years in the technology industry after FreightPath, building and selling 2 more companies, learning the mechanics of how power operated in their particular world. He knew things Caleb didn't know. Caleb, I want you to listen to me carefully. I'm listening. What you just described, sending a safety warning to a company 10 days before a billion-dollar launch, that is not the kind of thing a company like Vertex Link is going to receive as a gift. They are not going to say thank you. Let's review. They spent that money. They made those promises. They have investors, press, government contracts potentially tied to this launch. A delay is catastrophic for them, regardless of the reason. I know. So the legal letter is not a response to your concern. It's a warning shot. It's them saying, we see you. We don't know who you are yet, but if you make noise, we will make noise louder. I know that too. The question is, what do you want to do with that knowledge? Caleb was quiet, because Raymond continued, you have 2 options that I can see. Option 1, you walk away. You've done your due diligence. You sent the warning. They declined to act. That is on them. You protect yourself and Emma, and you let it play out. And option 2? Option 2 is the harder one, tell me. Option 2 is, you prove it. Not just with your memory, not just with old engineering documents. You build an actual demonstrable case, technical evidence that can be presented to a regulatory body or to journalists who understand the technology space or to someone's side Vertex Link with enough integrity to listen. You make it something they can't send a law firm letter to. And then you go public. That's the harder path. That path has consequences, Caleb. They have resources. They have lawyers. They demonstrated in 3 days that they're willing to use both. If they find out who you are, really are, they'll go after your job, your reputation. They'll find ways to make the story about you instead of about the system. Caleb looked across his apartment. Quiet in the daytime. Emma's drawing still on the kitchen table from yesterday. A horse, lovingly rendered, anatomically questionable. Chester sitting on the couch in the particular arranged way Emma always left him, propped up slightly so he wasn't just lying flat. Ray, he said. What happens when Meridian fails? Worst case. Raymond didn't answer immediately. He was precise too, when he needed to be. Hospital supply chain disruptions, potentially significant in major metro areas. Emergency services police, fire, ambulance, use logistics coordination systems that run on infrastructure Meridian will be embedded in. Food distribution for major retailers. The cascade failure you described in the routing logic, if it triggers under peak demand, which could be any given weekday between noon and 6 p.m. in a dozen major cities. Real people get hurt, yes. Caleb picked up the original design review from the table beside him. The graph paper, his own handwriting. The note in pencil at the bottom. This is not a margin issue. This is structural. I need your help, he said. Raymond was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. I know, he said. What do you need? I need someone who can verify the technical case independently, an engineer who understands distributed routing systems and has no prior connection to me or to Vertex Link. I need the original FreightPath acquisition documents, specifically the architecture ownership clauses. And I need someone in the regulatory space, FTC, FCC, whoever has jurisdiction over this kind of infrastructure failure, who would actually listen. The acquisition documents I can get. I have copies. The regulatory contact. Raymond paused. I know someone at the FTC who takes this kind of thing seriously. She's good. But Caleb, if I start making calls, this moves fast. Are you ready for that? The apartment was quiet. Emma was at school. She would be home at 3:15. She would drop her backpack at the door and immediately tell him 3 specific things about her day, in no particular order of importance, and then ask what was for dinner. She was proud of him. She would say it to anyone. He thought about what she had said at the kitchen door. You always know what the right thing is. You just sometimes take a while to decide you're allowed to do it. Yes, Caleb said. I'm ready. He was still on the phone with Raymond. They had moved from decisions to logistics, from logistics to specifics, already pulling up contact information on his end while they talked when Caleb's work phone buzzed. A message from Dale Hutchins. Call me when you can. Not urgent, but today if possible. He told Raymond he'd call him back in an hour. He called Dale. Dale picked up immediately, which meant he'd been waiting. Caleb. Thanks for calling. Listen. Dale's voice had the particular strained quality of a man delivering news he didn't want to deliver, and had been rehearsing how to deliver for longer than was comfortable. I need to talk to you about the other night. Okay. Management got a call from someone connected to the Meridian Group event. A concern was raised about your conduct during service. Caleb was very still. What concern? That you were, I'm reading from the note here, inappropriately confrontational with a guest. A pause. The guest in question was, I know who the guest was. Right. Dale cleared his throat. Caleb, I was there. I saw what happened. Between you and me, I thought you handled it. I mean, she was the way she spoke to you wasn't. He stopped. Started again. But this is coming from above me. And I've been asked to put you on administrative leave pending a review. Caleb said nothing. I'm sorry, Dale said. I genuinely am. I fought this. For what it's worth, I fought it. I know you did, Dale. Do you want to? It's okay, Caleb. It's okay. He meant it. Not in the defeated way. Not in the way of a man whose back had broken, but in the way of a man who had just had a door close and understood, with complete clarity, the door had been closed by the same person who had sent a law firm letter 3 days ago, and that the closing of the door was, in its own way, information. Important information. She had found out who he was. Or she had found out that he existed in a way that was inconvenient. Either way, the timeline had changed. He thanked Dale. He hung up. He called Raymond back. They just got me fired, he said. Raymond was quiet for a beat. How long since the dinner? 3 days. They've been working it. Which means they checked on you. Which means they know I sent the email. Or they know enough to want me quiet. Do they know the rest? Who you are, specifically. Freight path. I don't know. Maybe not. Yet. If they knew that, they'd have led with something stronger than an employment complaint. Then we have a window, Raymond said. Small one. How small? 9 days until the launch. Caleb did the math he'd already done. Then we need to move, he said. Starting now. Raymond had already started. That was the thing about Raymond Cho, he didn't wait. It had made him a great salesman and a genuinely loyal friend, and in that particular moment, Caleb was grateful for both qualities in equal measure. By the end of the day, 3 things were in motion. The original Freight Path acquisition documents were being pulled by Raymond's attorney, an independent systems engineer named Dr. Patricia Voss, who had spent 20 years in distributed network architecture and had no prior connection to Vertex Link, and had agreed to review Caleb's technical case under a preliminary confidentiality arrangement. And a contact at the FTC's Office of Technology Policy had been sent a brief overview of the situation, carefully worded, without Caleb's name attached yet. By the end of the day, something else had happened too. A story appeared online, a short piece published on a tech media site that covered industry drama the way entertainment sites covered celebrity gossip quickly, breathlessly, without much attention to the sourcing. The story described, in vague but unmistakable terms, a disgruntled, former service industry employee who had sent unsolicited technical claims to Vertex Link ahead of their major product launch, and who had been involved in an altercation with a guest at a private corporate dinner. There was no name. There was a video clip embedded in the story. The clip was from Harrington's security camera footage, clearly from the dining room. It showed Caleb from an angle that made him appear to be leaning aggressively toward the table, and Vivian Sterling pulling back slightly in her chair. The clip was 14 seconds long. It had been edited. What it didn't show, the 4 minutes of conversation that preceded it. What it didn't show, Vivian Sterling mocking his daughter. What it showed to anyone watching without context was a waiter in a confrontation with a seated guest. The comments under the story were what you'd expect. Mostly dismissive, some sympathetic, a few that had found the clip interesting, for reasons the publisher probably hadn't intended. Caleb read the story once. He put his phone face down on the table. He sat in the quiet of his apartment with nine days left on a clock he hadn't started and thought about what Emma had said at the kitchen door. You always know what the right thing is. He thought about the note in pencil on graph paper from 15 years ago. This is not a margin issue. This is structural. He thought about Sarah reading to a 4-month-old Emma from whatever book she was teaching, because she believed stories mattered even before you understood them. He thought about Vivian Sterling standing at her window the night of the dinner, looking out at Lake Michigan, and he thought you made a mistake. Not the video, not the law firm, not the employment complaint. The mistake she made was simpler than any of that. She had looked at a man carrying a plate and decided he had nothing left to lose. She was wrong. He had everything to lose, and men with everything to lose are the most dangerous kind. Raymond called at 7 the next morning. Caleb was already up. He had been up since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with his original engineering documents spread in front of him, cross-referencing his 15-year-old design notes against the publicly available technical specification Vertex link had released for the Meridian platform. The specifications were written for investors, not engineers, heavy on language about scale and capability, thin on actual architecture detail, but Caleb knew how to read between the lines. He had written those kinds of documents once himself, back when FrightPath was trying to attract funding and the art was in what you revealed and what you carefully didn't. He could see the shape of what they'd done, and the more clearly he saw it, the more certain he became. Patricia Voss reviewed your documents overnight, Raymond said without preamble. That was Raymond at his best, no warm-up when time was short. She wants to talk to you directly, today if possible. What's her read? She didn't give me a full read. She said she needed to talk to you first. But Caleb, a pause. She didn't dismiss it. Patricia Voss doesn't lose sleep over things that don't warrant losing sleep over. She was up until 3 in the morning with your files. Caleb set down his pen. Set it up, he said, whenever she's available. Noon, I'll send you the video link. Okay, how are you doing? It was asked the way Raymond asked important questions directly, without framing, leaving room for a real answer. I'm okay, Caleb said. I slept a little, Emma? She doesn't know about the job yet. I'll tell her tonight. How do you think she'll take it? Caleb looked at the kitchen door. Chester was sitting on the couch in the living room, propped up in his arranged way. Emma had left for school 40 minutes ago, and she'd kissed Caleb's cheek on the way out and told him she'd gotten an A on her history project about the space race, and that her teacher had read part of it to the class, and her voice had carried that particular frequency, trying not to sound too proud, failing beautifully. That was pure Emma. She'll be fine, he said. She's her mother's daughter. Another brief silence. The good kind. Noon, Raymond said. Don't be late. Dr. Patricia Voss appeared on Caleb's laptop screen at 12:02, which Caleb noted because precision in small things was, in his experience, a reliable indicator of how someone operated in larger ones. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, with the compact, no-excess energy of someone who had spent decades in technical fields where being right mattered more than being comfortable. Short silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a whiteboard behind her covered in notation that Caleb recognized as distributed systems architecture, the real kind, working kind, not the kind you put in presentations. She looked at him for a moment before speaking, assessing. You're the original architect. Yes. Walk me through the load balancing decision. The one in the original FreightPath design, not the document you're reasoning. Why did you structure the cascade prevention the way you did? Caleb understood immediately. She wasn't testing whether he had written the documents. She was testing whether he had understood what he was writing. You could steal a design. You couldn't fake the reasoning behind it. He walked her through it. It took 11 minutes. He talked about the original problem space, the specific failure patterns he had observed in existing logistics routing systems before FreightPath, the ones that broke under load, because they optimized for speed at the expense of what he called structural slack. The built-in tolerance that allowed a system to absorb unexpected demand spikes without collapsing. He talked about why he had designed the cascade prevention protocol the way he had,
not as a secondary system,
which was the conventional approach, but as a primary architectural feature woven into the core routing logic itself. He talked about the specific load distribution ratios and why altering them beyond a certain threshold would undermine the entire prevention system. Patricia Voss listened without moving. When he finished, she took her glasses off her forehead, put them on, and looked at the documents again. The modification they made, she said, not looking up, is in Section 4 of their public architecture spec. It's framed as an optimization, faster rerouting response time under standard conditions. I know. Most engineers reading it would see an improvement. Most engineers didn't build the original. She looked up at him now. No, she said, they didn't. She set her glasses back on her forehead. What they've done is remove the structural slack from the cascade protocol and replace it with a predictive model. The predictive model works beautifully under standard operating conditions. Under load spikes that exceed a certain threshold, and we're talking about thresholds that are reached regularly in major metro supply chains, the predictive model fails to compensate fast enough, and the cascade protocol has nothing underneath it. That's what I saw. I ran 3 simulations last night, she said, using publicly available infrastructure data from major hospital systems in Chicago, Atlanta, and Houston. A pause. In 2 out of 3 simulations, the failure cascades within 4 minutes of the triggering load event. The number landed in the room between them. 4 minutes. Caleb. She used his first name for the first time. If this platform goes live and operates at scale, and if a peak demand event occurs which, as I said, happens regularly, people will be hurt. Not theoretically, actually, I know. Then you understand the urgency. I've understood the urgency for 3 weeks. The question is how to make someone else understand it fast enough to matter. Patricia Voss nodded slowly. The nod of a person who had been in situations before where being technically correct was only the beginning of the problem. I'll put my name on it, she said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You understand what that means, he said. They have a law firm. They've already. I know what it means. I've been in this industry for 26 years, and I have watched important safety concerns get quietly buried under legal correspondence and media manipulation more times than I want to count. She looked directly at the camera. I'm 61 years old. I have a very good reputation that I've spent a very long time building. I'm not going to sit on something like this because it's inconvenient. A pause. Put my name on the technical report. I'll co-sign it. Caleb exhaled. It was the first time in 3 weeks that the pressure in his chest had shifted. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when the launch is stopped. She picked up a pen. Now, tell me about the original acquisition documents. I need to understand the ownership chain on the architecture before we take this anywhere official. That conversation lasted another 40 minutes. When it was over, Caleb sat at his kitchen table and looked at the document spread in front of him, the graph paper, the design notes, the acquisition papers that Raymond's attorney had emailed over that morning, and felt, for the first time, like they were building something that had shape, something with weight and structure. Something that could hold. He spent the rest of the afternoon organizing. He was good at organizing. It was the same skill that made him a good engineer and, years later, a good waiter. The ability to understand a complex system, identify the load-bearing elements, and arrange everything else in relationship to them. The load-bearing elements here were 3 things: the technical case, which Patricia Voss was formalizing; the ownership record, which the acquisition documents established clearly; Caleb Morgan, lead architect, original creator of the FreightPath routing system, which formed the foundational architecture of Vertex Link Meridian, and the pattern of suppression, which was already building its own record. The legal letter, the employment complaint, the edited video. They were building a case. 9 days, 8 now. He worked until 3:15. When he heard Emma's key in the door, he stacked the papers neatly, closed his laptop, and stood up. She came in backpack first, the way she always did, dropped it at the door, and immediately said 3 things: that her math teacher had given them a test they hadn't studied for, that her best friend Priya had gotten a new dog and it was named Waffle, and that she was absolutely starving and could they please have pasta for dinner. In that order? Caleb asked. They're all equally important. She kicked her shoes off. Can we have pasta? We can have pasta. She settled into the kitchen and started telling him about the math test. In more detail, she thought she'd done fine, actually. But she was going to say she hadn't, because it made the grade feel better when it came back. And Caleb made pasta and listened, and thought about how to tell her about the job. He told her after dinner. He kept it simple. He said that the woman from the dinner the other night had made a complaint about him to the restaurant, and that he was on a leave of absence while they reviewed it. Emma looked at him carefully. The woman who said the thing about me. Yes, she got you suspended, leave of absence. It's not necessarily permanent. Emma was quiet for a moment, fork turning in her pasta. She did it because of the email? Caleb looked at her. How do you know about the email? I'm guessing. She looked up at him. You've been at your computer every morning when I wake up. You have that look you get when you're working on something technical, like you're solving something in your head even when you're talking to me. A pause. And you had that box out from the closet. He should have known. Emma paid attention. She always had to him, especially with that steady, unobtrusive watchfulness that children develop when they have grown up in a household where a parent is carrying something heavy and they want to understand the weight of it without adding to it. Yes, he said, the email. About the system. How did you? I found the forum post. The one about Vertex Link Meridian. She set her fork down. I read it. I looked up the architecture specs. I understood about 70% of it. A beat. The 30% I didn't understand, I looked up. Caleb looked at his daughter, 10 years old. Looked it up. Emma. Is it as dangerous as the post says? He thought about whether to answer honestly. He thought about what Sarah would say about that, and he knew exactly what Sarah would say. Because Sarah had believed that the worst thing you could do to a child was protect them from the truth of things that genuinely mattered. Yes, he said, it's as dangerous as the post says, possibly more. Emma nodded slowly, in the deliberate way she did when she was processing something important. And you're the one who built it, the original, yes. So you're the only one who can prove it. I'm not the only one anymore. But yes, I'm essential to the case. She picked up her fork again. She ate a few bites. She seemed to be deciding something. Then she didn't win, Emma said, getting you fired. She thought it would stop you, but it didn't, so she didn't win. Not yet. She's going to try harder, probably. Emma put her fork down again and looked at him with an expression that was so clear and so steady and so deeply reminiscent of her mother, at her most serious, that Caleb had to breathe through the recognition of it. I'm not scared, she said. I just want you to know that. Whatever she does next, I'm not scared, I know. Are you? He thought about it honestly. I'm careful, he said. There's a difference. She seemed to accept that. She picked up her fork. Good, she said. Careful is better than scared anyway. They came for the story 2 days later. Caleb heard about it from Raymond, who heard about it from a contact in the tech press, who had been approached by a public relations firm with a story pitch. The pitch, as relayed to Raymond, was straightforward in its architecture. A disgruntled former tech professional, bitter about a business sale he'd made voluntarily 15 years ago, was attempting to sabotage Vertex Link's major launch by spreading false technical claims. The story would frame Caleb's email as an extortion attempt, a man trying to leverage safety concerns into some form of compensation or credit. There was no documentation supporting this framing. There didn't need to be yet. The pitch was a trial balloon. They were testing which journalist would bite. How many reached out? Caleb asked. 3 so far. 2 declined. One is doing some kind of profile piece, the waiter who tried to take down a billionaire. That kind of angle. Sympathetic or hostile. Too early to tell. The journalist's name is Kevin Marsh. He writes for a tech publication called Dataline. He's serious, not the kind of guy who writes hit pieces without checking his sources. But he's talking to people connected to Vertex Link. Has he tried to contact me? Not yet. When he does, I'll talk to him. Raymond paused. Are you sure about that? If he's serious, he deserves a real conversation. And I'd rather he hear from me directly than from whatever Vertex Link is constructing. Okay, Raymond didn't argue. He trusted Caleb's read of situations like this always had, going back to the early freight path. Days when Caleb's instinct for when to move and when to hold had saved them from at least 2 decisions that would have been catastrophic. There's something else. Tell me. Patricia finished the formal technical report this morning. She's signing it. It's thorough, Caleb, 19 pages. Simulation results included. It's the kind of document that doesn't get easily dismissed. A pause. She's also willing to speak directly with the FTC contact I mentioned, if and when that conversation happens. It needs to happen soon. I know. The contact, her name is Margaret O.C. She's in the Office of Technology Policy. She's been briefed on the overview. She wants to see the full technical report before she commits to anything formal. I'm sending it today. Good. 7 days, Caleb. I know how many days. There was a beat. The kind that meant Raymond had something he was deciding whether to say. They're not going to stop, Raymond said. The PR campaign, the media framing, that's just the beginning. When they realize you're not backing down and you have actual technical support behind you, they're going to escalate. That's what companies like this do. They make it personal. They look for leverage. I know. Is there anything they can find? Anything in your history that they could? No, Caleb said it flatly. Not defensively. My life for the last 6 years has been Emma and work. There's nothing. What about before? The sale, is there any angle they could take on the freight path acquisition? That you sold under pressure, that the terms were. I sold voluntarily. The terms were fair. There are no disputes on record. A pause. The only thing they might find is that I sold my shares to fund Sarah's medical treatment. And if they try to use that as a weapon, then they confirm exactly the kind of people they are. Raymond finished. Yes, another silence. I'll get the report to Margaret today, Raymond said. Keep your phone on. Kevin Marsh reached out that afternoon. His email was brief, professional, and specific in a way that Caleb respected. He identified himself, his publication, and the exact angle he was investigating, a dispute between an original technology creator and the company that now controls the derivative platform, and said he would appreciate an opportunity to speak with Caleb, directly, on or off the record, at Caleb's discretion. Caleb read it twice. He called Raymond. Talk to him, Raymond said, without waiting to hear the full question. On the record, he framed the story as a creator dispute, not a sabotage angle. That's meaningful. I want to think about it for an hour. Think fast. The launch is in 7 days. Every day of the story cycle matters. Caleb thought about it for 40 minutes. He emailed Kevin Marsh back and said he would talk. He suggested a coffee shop in Wicker Park that was loud enough to have some ambient cover, and public enough that the meeting had no ambiguity to it. Marsh agreed immediately. They met the next morning. Marsh was younger than Caleb had expected, mid-30s, with the slightly rumpled look of someone who spent most of his time at a desk and thought about his appearance primarily in the context of whether it would make sources trust him. He had a recorder, which he placed on the table openly and asked permission to use. Caleb gave it. I appreciate you meeting me, Marsh said. I appreciate you asking the right questions in your email. Marsh looked at him for a moment. I want to be upfront with you. I've spoken with representatives of Vertex Link. Not Vivian Sterling, directly her communications team. Their version of this story is substantially different from what I understand yours to be. I know what their version is. They're characterizing you as someone with a long-standing grievance against the company that you believe you deserve credit or compensation for the original freight path architecture, and that the safety claims are a vehicle for that grievance. Caleb wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He was very calm. Is there a question in there? Marsh almost smiled. Is any of that accurate? No. No to which part? No to the characterization. I do not have a grievance against Vertex Link. I sold Freight Path voluntarily for reasons that had nothing to do with regret or resentment. I have not asked Vertex Link for credit or compensation. I have not threatened them with anything. I sent a safety concern in professional language to their engineering division. He paused. Their response was to send a law firm letter, arrange for my employment termination, and plant a story in the trade press framing me as unstable. That is the sequence of events, Marsh was writing. You said you sold FreightPath for personal reasons. Can you be more specific? Caleb looked out the window of the coffee shop for a moment. My wife was ill, he said. She needed treatment that was expensive. I had value in the company. I converted it to cash because that was what the situation required. And she died 6 years ago. I have a daughter who is 10. Marsh wrote this down too. His pen had slowed slightly. The specific, careful slowing of someone who was recalibrating. I'm sorry, he said. Thank you. And the technical claim, the safety concern. What's the basis for that? Caleb told him. He told him clearly, and at length, translating the engineering specifics into language that a smart non-engineer could follow, the way he had learned to do in the early FreightPath days, when they were trying to make investors understand something fundamentally technical without losing them in the details. He explained the cascade failure mechanism. He explained what it meant in practical terms: supply chains, hospital systems, emergency services. He explained that he had independent technical verification from Dr. Patricia Voss, whose name and credentials he provided. Marsh looked up from his notes. Patricia Voss is signing off on this? Yes. Something shifted in Marsh's expression. Not dramatically, but it shifted. I'll need to speak with her. I'll facilitate that. Caleb paused. I'll also provide you with the original FreightPath design documents, the ones with my name and date on them, and the acquisition records that establish the ownership chain from FreightPath to Vertex Link. Marsh looked at him steadily. You've been building this case. I've been building the truth. There's documentation behind every claim I'm making. Why now? Marsh set his pen down, an off-record gesture. He wanted a real answer. If the sale was clean, if there's no grievance, why are you doing this now? The risk to you is significant. You've already lost your job. They're going to come after your reputation. Because in 6 days, a system that I know is dangerous goes live and starts operating inside infrastructure that affects real people. Caleb looked at Marsh directly. I am the person who can stop it. There is no version of that situation in which I do nothing. Marsh picked up his pen. Can I quote that? Yes. The article came out 48 hours later. It was not the piece Vertex Link had been engineering. Kevin Marsh had spent those 48 hours doing what serious journalists do: checking sources, verifying documentation, speaking with Patricia Voss for 90 minutes, requesting comment from Vertex Link's communications team, and reading the original FreightPath technical papers that Caleb had provided. The headline read, "Before the billion-dollar platform, there was a waiter and a warning nobody wanted to hear." The piece was thorough and careful. It told the story of FreightPath, of Caleb's original architecture, of the sale and its reason. It presented Patricia Voss's technical findings in accessible language. It quoted Caleb directly. It included Vertex Link's official comment, a carefully constructed statement asserting the platform's safety and dismissing the concerns as unverified. And it placed that comment in direct contrast with Voss's signed technical report, which Marsh had reproduced in excerpt. The piece did not call Vertex Link dishonest. It didn't need to. It let the documented sequence of events, the safety email, the law firm response, the employment complaint, the PR campaign speak for itself. By noon on publication day, the piece had 40,000 shares. By evening, it had crossed 200,000. Caleb heard about the numbers from Raymond, who was tracking it with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what a story going viral meant in practical terms. He was at home, sitting with Emma, who was doing her homework at the kitchen table and pretending not to be monitoring his phone calls. The FTC contact reached out, Raymond said. Margaret Ossie. She's seen the article. She's seen the technical report. She wants a formal meeting, me, Patricia Voss. Day after tomorrow. Set it up. It's set up. Caleb. Raymond's voice had a quality to it now that recognized from the old FreightPath days. The quality of someone watching a complex system behave exactly as predicted after a long period of uncertainty. Relief but disciplined. This is moving, I know. Are you ready for what comes next? Caleb looked at Emma, who was bent over her homework, pencil moving, absolutely not looking at him. Yes, he said. Emma's pencil stopped for just a moment. Then it started again. What came next arrived. The following morning, before the FTC meeting, before Raymond's next call, before Caleb had finished his first cup of coffee. It arrived in the form of a document hand-delivered by a process server to his apartment door at 8:15 a.m. while Emma was still eating breakfast. He signed for it at the door, keeping his body angled so Emma, at the kitchen table, couldn't see the envelope clearly. He brought it inside, set it on the counter, and told Emma he needed to make a quick call and would be right back. He went to the bedroom. He opened the envelope. It was a legal complaint. Filed in Cook County Circuit Court, Plaintiff, Vertex Link Communications Corp. Defendant, Caleb James Morgan. The complaint alleged defamation, tortious interference with business relations, and misappropriation of proprietary intellectual property. It alleged that Caleb's statements to Kevin Marsh and to the FTC had contained false and damaging claims made with malicious intent. It alleged that the freight path architectural documents Caleb had shared constituted proprietary information to which he no longer held rights under the terms of the original acquisition agreement, and it requested an emergency injunction to stop him from speaking publicly about Vertex Link or its products pending trial, to remove the technical documents from public circulation, and to compel him to appear in court within 72 hours. Caleb read the complaint from first page to last, 19 pages. He read it. The way he read, engineering documents carefully, looking for the load-bearing elements, mapping where the structure was strong and where it was weak. It was not as strong as it looked. The intellectual property claim was overreaching the acquisition agreement, which Raymond's attorney had already reviewed, transferred rights to the freight path software and codebase, not to the underlying architectural concepts or to Caleb's independent knowledge of system he had designed. The defamation claim rested on the assertion that his safety concerns were false, which required disproving Patricia Voss's technical report, a report signed by one of the most credentialed distributed systems engineers in the country. It was designed to frighten, not to win. He knew the difference. He sat on the edge of his bed with the complaint in his hands and thought about Emma at the kitchen table with her cereal, waiting for him to come back. He thought about the process server in the hallway. He thought about Vivian Sterling, somewhere across the city, sitting at a desk and reviewing the same complaint, and believing, with the confidence of someone who had always had the resources to make problems go away, that this would work. He thought about what she had said at the dinner table. Does your daughter tell her friends that her father serves billionaires for a living? He thought about Emma saying, I'm not scared. He put the complaint back in the envelope. He walked back to the kitchen. Emma looked up. Everything okay? Yes, he said. Eat your cereal. You'll be late. She looked at him for a moment with those steady, seeing eyes. Dad, Emma, I said I'm not scared. He poured himself more coffee and sat down across from her. I know you did. So you don't have to protect me from whatever's in that envelope. He looked at her. 10 years old. He thought about what Sarah would do in this moment. Not what she would say, what she would do. She would put both hands around her coffee cup. She would look at Emma directly. She would tell her the truth. In exactly the amount of Dino was ready to handle, which was always more than most people assumed. They filed a lawsuit, he said. Emma was very still. They want a court order to stop me from talking publicly about the system before the launch. Can they get it? They can apply for it. Getting it is harder. Our attorney thinks the injunction request is weak. It depends on the IP claim, and the IP claim has problems. What kind of problems? They're claiming I don't have the right to share documents that are based on my own original work. But there's a difference between the software they purchased and the knowledge I built it from. The law recognizes that difference, even if it takes time to establish it. Emma processed this. Her cereal was getting soggy, and she wasn't eating it. How much time? 72 hours to the first hearing, before the launch. So it'll be decided before the launch. The injunction hearing will be, yes, and if the judge says no injunction, then we continue. The FTC meeting proceeds. The story stays up, and we have 4 days to get the launch stopped, through legitimate channels. And if the judge says yes? Caleb looked at his daughter. Then we appeal, he said, and we find another way. Emma looked at her cereal. She picked up her spoon and ate a bite, mechanically. She's doing all of this, Emma said, because she's scared of you. Maybe, not maybe. Emma looked up. If she wasn't scared, she'd just let it go. She'd say, this is a disgruntled waiter with no resources and no credibility, and she'd move on. She wouldn't get lawyers involved. She wouldn't get you fired. She wouldn't. She stopped. Her voice had gotten tighter. She put the spoon down. She's doing all of this because she knows you're right. Caleb looked at her. She was gripping the edge of the table. Not crying. Emma was not a crier. She was her mother's daughter in that too. When she was angry, she got still and precise, and her voice went quiet rather than loud. She thinks because she has money, and you don't. You'll give up, Emma said. That's what she thinks. Yes, she's wrong. Yes. I need you to know that. I know that, Emma said. Not because I'm trying to make you feel better. Because it's true. You built the thing that made her rich. You sold it to save Mom, and now she's using her lawyers to try to stop you from telling the truth about what she did to it. A pause. She picked up her spoon again. There isn't a version of this where she wins, Dad. There isn't. Caleb looked at his daughter for a long moment. He thought about Sarah in the rocking chair, reading to a 4-month-old Emma from whatever book she was teaching, because she believed stories mattered before you understood them. He thought that Sarah had been right. Here was Emma, 10 years old, with soggy cereal and a firm grip on the edge of the table, and the absolute, unperformative certainty of someone who had been taught, by the way people around her lived, what it meant to stand for something. You're going to be late, he said. I know. She stood up, pushed in her chair, picked up her backpack from the door. Call Raymond, and call whoever the lawyer is. And she stopped at the door. Tell Patricia Voss she's my hero. She left. Caleb sat at the kitchen table for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Raymond. They filed, he said. I know. Our attorney called me 20 minutes ago. Raymond's voice was controlled, steady. She's already preparing the response. The injunction request is overreaching, she said it, and I quote, they've confused owning a building with owning the physics of construction. The IP argument doesn't hold. That's what I thought. The hearing is Thursday morning. 2 days, the FTC meeting is Wednesday. I know. We keep both appointments. We go to the FTC Wednesday with Patricia and the full technical report. We go to court Thursday, and we beat the injunction. And then we use whatever time we have left to push the FTC toward emergency action on the launch. 4 days. 4 days. Caleb looked at the legal envelope on the counter. He thought about what Emma had said. There isn't a version of this where she wins. He thought about whether he believed that. He decided he did. Not with the blind confidence of someone who hadn't thought about the risks. Not with the easy optimism of someone who hadn't read 19 pages of legal complaint carefully, but with the specific, grounded certainty of someone who had looked at the structure of a situation, all its load-bearing elements, all its points of failure, and understood which side the weight was on. The weight was on his side. It had always been on his side. He was the man who built the foundation. And Vivian Sterling, for all her money and lawyers and power and pale blue eyes that cataloged rooms in 45 seconds, had spent 4 years building on top of something she didn't understand. That was her mistake. Not the law firm, not the PR campaign, not even the lawsuit. The mistake was the modification she'd made to the architecture, removing the structural slack from the cascade prevention protocol, replacing it with a predictive model that looked faster and smarter and better on paper, but would fail catastrophically, and certainly under the conditions that Caleb had been designing against for 3 months in a rented office. 15 years ago, she had looked at his work and thought she could improve it without understanding it, and now the whole structure was wrong. Caleb picked up his phone. He had calls to make. He had 4 days. He got to work. The FTC meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Wednesday in a federal building on West Madison Street that Caleb had walked past 100 times during his years in Chicago without ever going inside. He arrived at 9:45. Raymond was already there, standing outside in the cold with 2 cups of coffee, wearing the kind of suit he wore when things were serious, not expensive, exactly, but precise. Raymond Cho had always understood that presentation was a form of argument. He handed Caleb a cup. "Patricia's inside," Raymond said. "She got here at 9:15. She brought the full report, printed and bound, 14 copies. 14. She wanted to make sure nobody had an excuse not to read it." They walked inside together. Patricia Voss was in the lobby, sitting very straight in a chair with a leather document case on her lap, wearing reading glasses and reviewing something on her phone. She looked up when she saw them. "The injunction hearing is tomorrow morning," she said, by way of greeting. 9 a.m., Caleb confirmed. "Then let's make sure today matters enough that tomorrow is a formality." She stood up. She was shorter than Caleb remembered, from the video call, compact and direct in the way she moved. She extended her hand. "I've read your original design files 3 more times since we last spoke. You were 26 years old when you built that architecture. 27 when it actually worked. Still." She looked at him the way engineers look at other engineers appraising, but not unkind. "It was good work, the real kind, not the kind that looks good on paper." A pause. "Let's go make sure the right people understand what was done to it." Margaret Osei met them in a conference room on the 4th floor, with 2 colleagues from her office whose names Caleb catalogued and promptly organized by their apparent roles. One was technical, one was legal. Margaret herself was in her mid-40s, deliberate in the way of someone who had spent years making consequential decisions in rooms where the stakes were high and the political currents were complicated. She shook hands with each of them, gestured to chairs, and sat down without any preliminary social warmth, not cold, just focused. The kind of focused that meant she had read the materials already and had questions she wanted answered. "Dr. Voss," she began, "your report is thorough. I want to start with your simulation methodology, because that's the piece my technical colleagues have the most questions about." Patricia Voss opened her document case and had the relevant pages ready before the question was fully out of Margaret's mouth. What followed was 90 minutes of the most technically dense conversation Caleb had been part of since the Freight Path days. Patricia walked them through the simulation methodology in precise detail: data sources, load parameters, failure threshold definitions, the cascade propagation model. Margaret's technical colleague, a quiet man named Dr. James Huang, asked specific questions that indicated he genuinely understood what he was looking at. Patricia answered each one completely, without defensiveness, occasionally referring to pages in the bound report with the confidence of someone who had not only written the document, but could have recited from memory, if required. Caleb spoke when the questions turned to the original architecture, why the structural slack had been designed the way it had, what the specific load conditions were that the cascade prevention protocol was built to handle, and why the modification Vertex Link had made was not an optimization, but a fundamental undermining of the system's safety architecture. He kept it clear. He kept it grounded in engineering logic rather than emotion. He had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you could do in a room where important decisions were being made was to make the truth as easy to understand as possible. Drama and certainty were different things. What he was offering was certainty. At the 90-minute mark, Margaret's legal colleague, a woman named Andrea Park, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, and whose quietness Caleb had been reading as careful attention, leaned forward. "Mr. Morgan, Vertex Link has filed a civil complaint against you, asserting, among other things, that the technical claims you've made are false and damaging. How do you respond to that characterization?" "The same way I'd respond to any assertion that contradicts documented evidence," Caleb said. With the documentation, he placed on the table in order the original Freight Path design files with dates and his signature, the acquisition agreement with the IP transfer clauses highlighted, and the specific language establishing that the transfer covered software implementation, not underlying architectural concepts. Patricia Voss's signed technical report. The forum post from 3 weeks ago by an anonymous author who had independently reached the same conclusions. And the legal response from Hargrove Sterling and Associates, dated 3 days after his safety email, before any public statement, before the Kevin Marsh article, before any of the actions Vertex Link was characterizing as harmful. They responded with legal pressure. "Before I said anything publicly, Caleb said. That timeline is documented. The suppression preceded the speech. Andrea Park looked at the documents. She looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Caleb. The launch is in 4 days, Margaret said. Yes. Emergency action on our end, a formal inquiry, a request for voluntary delay. Any official communication requires authorization I don't have in this room today. I want to be transparent with you about that. Raymond leaned forward. What would it take to get that authorization? A clear technical finding from an independent expert that the platform poses an imminent public safety risk. She paused. Which Dr. Voss has provided. Then, a determination by our legal team that we have jurisdictional standing to act on the specific infrastructure categories at risk. She nodded at Andrea Park, which is what Andrea is going to be doing for the next 24 hours. Caleb looked at Margaret directly. I want to ask you something, he said. Go ahead. Not as the person who built the system, just as a person. If this platform goes live and fails under peak demand conditions, and it will fail, Dr. Voss's simulations are not theoretical, how many people are we talking about? Realistically, Margaret was quiet for a moment. The infrastructure categories at risk: hospital supply chains, emergency services coordination, food distribution, serve approximately 40 million people across the major metropolitan markets, where Meridian is scheduled to deploy in its first phase. A pause. A cascade failure affecting those categories simultaneously, even for a few hours, would result in supply disruptions affecting critical care facilities, delayed emergency response coordination, and distribution gaps in perishable food supply chains. Another pause. We're not talking about inconvenience. The room was very quiet. No, Caleb said, we're not. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. I'll have an answer for you by tomorrow afternoon, she said. Before your court hearing concludes, whatever our determination is, I'll call Raymond directly. Thank you, Raymond said. She stood. They shook hands. As they were gathering their materials, Margaret touched Caleb's arm, briefly, a light, intentional gesture. For what it's worth, she said quietly. You should know that we've been aware of concerns about this platform for 6 weeks. We've received 3 separate inquiries, all of them vaguer than yours, all from sources less verifiable. What you've brought us today is different. She held his gaze. It matters that you came. Caleb nodded. He picked up his folder. He walked out. In the elevator going down, Raymond said nothing for a full floor and a half. Then she's going to act, maybe, Caleb. She said they've had concerns for 6 weeks. She was telling us they were already building toward this. We just gave them what they were missing. She said she'd call tomorrow afternoon. She'll call. Raymond was certain in the way he was always certain when his read of a room matched his read of the people in it. She's going to act. Patricia Voss had her document case closed and under her arm. She looked at both of them. The injunction hearing tomorrow, she said. I've agreed to appear as a technical expert if needed. Caleb looked at her. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. She looked back at him with the same direct steadiness she'd had in the video call. Your attorney knows I'm available. If the judge has technical questions, and a competent judge should have technical questions, I'll be there. A pause. Go home. See your daughter. You look like you haven't slept properly in a week. 5 days, he said. Close enough. Emma was at Priya's house after school, which meant the apartment was quiet when Caleb got home. He sat at the kitchen table and didn't open his laptop. He didn't spread documents. He just sat. He thought about 40 million people. He thought about Sarah's treatment. The medical system that had worked to save her, imperfect and expensive, as it was the supply chains that kept hospitals stocked, the coordination networks that made specialist care possible, the infrastructure underneath the infrastructure that most people never saw or thought about until it failed. He thought about how he had built the original freight system, partly because he understood, in a technical way, how fragile those networks were, how a single point of failure in the wrong place could ripple outward in ways that ordinary people waiting in emergency rooms, people depending on a medication supply, people whose temperature-controlled medication was sitting in a distribution center somewhere would feel immediately and personally, and with no understanding of why. He had built something to prevent that. and someone had taken it apart without understanding what they were taking apart. He was still sitting there when Emma came home at 5:30. She dropped her backpack, glanced at him, registered the quality of his stillness, and went to the kitchen. She came back with 2 glasses of water and put one in front of him. It went well, I think. FTC? Yes. And? They're deciding tonight and tomorrow. We'll know before the court hearing. She sat across from him, both hands around her water glass, mirroring his posture without intending to. Are you scared now? He thought about it. I'm the right kind of worried, he said. There's a difference between worried and scared. Worried means you understand what could go wrong and you're doing something about it. Scared means it's already controlling you. Emma looked at him. Mom used to say something like that. I know, I learned it from her. Emma looked at her water glass. I talked to Priya about it today, she said. Not all of it. Just I said. My dad was dealing with something important, and I was trying to figure out how to think about it. What did Priya say? She said her mom always says that the way you know someone is doing the right thing is that they keep doing it, even when it gets harder, not easier. A beat. I thought that was pretty good. Priya's mom is pretty good. I told her you'd keep going even if it got really hard. Emma looked up. I wanted you to know that I said that. That I meant it. Caleb looked at his daughter across the kitchen table. He thought about the moment she had been born, the specific cellular shock of it, the way it reorganized everything inside him, instantly and permanently. He thought about watching her grow up, in the years after Sarah, the way she had processed grief at 4 and 5 and 6, with a seriousness that had broken his heart, and filled him with a pride he didn't have language for. He thought about her saying, I'm not scared, and meaning it. About you always know what the right thing is, you just sometimes take a while to decide you're allowed to do it. He thought about what it meant that she had been shaped, partly, by watching him choose dignity over bitterness every morning, when he put on a uniform and carried plates for people who didn't see him, and had decided, based on that watching, that her father was worth being proud of. He thought that Sarah would have loved this version of Emma, and then corrected himself, because Sarah had always known this version was coming. I know, he said. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just win. He didn't sleep much that night. But it was a productive kind of not sleeping. He lay in the dark and went through the court, hearing in his mind the way he used to run engineering simulations, identifying the variables, mapping the possible outcomes, understanding which ones he could control and which ones he couldn't. He was not a lawyer, and he understood that the courtroom was someone else's technical domain, but he trusted his attorney, a woman named Sharon Adler, who Raymond had known for 15 years, and who had, when Raymond called her, said immediately, if they're trying to block a safety warning with an I pay claim, I want this case, and he trusted the documentation. The injunction request would fail. He believed that, not with wishful certainty, but with the specific, grounded confidence of someone who had read the complaint carefully and understood where the weight was. The question was whether it would fail fast enough. 4 days, 3 now. He got up at 5 and made coffee and sat with his engineering documents one more time. Not to review them. He had reviewed them enough that the information lived in him rather than on the page. He sat with them, the way you sit with something that matters. The graph paper, the pencil note. This is not a margin issue. This is structural. He thought about being 26 years old in a rented office on West Monroe Street, working late, getting the architecture right because getting it right mattered even when nobody was watching. He thought about what it felt like to build something true. He thought about Vivian Sterling, building a billion-dollar empire on top of it, without knowing, or needing to know, where the foundation came from. He closed the folder. He was ready. Cook County Circuit Court. Sharon Adler was waiting outside the courtroom at 8:45, with the particular focused calm of a litigator on game day, not relaxed, exactly, but channeling. She shook Caleb's hand, then Raymond's. Patricia Voss is here, she said. I've seated her in the gallery. If I need her, I'll call her up. The judge is the Honorable Robert Castillo. He's been on the bench for 16 years. He has a background in commercial litigation, and he is known for not tolerating procedural games dressed up as substantive arguments. She looked at Caleb directly. Which is exactly what this injunction is. Their argument, Raymond asked. They're going on IP misappropriation as the primary basis for the injunction that Caleb has shared proprietary Vertex Link architecture in his public statements and in the technical report provided to the FTC. Their secondary argument is irreparable harm to business interests from the alleged defamatory statements. She opened her folder. My response is going to be two-pronged. First, the IP argument fails because the acquisition agreement transferred software implementation rights, not the creator's underlying architectural knowledge, a distinction that has some substantial case law behind it. Second, the irreparable harm argument fails because the harm they're describing, reputational and financial impact, is not the kind of irreparable harm that injunctions are designed to prevent. Injunctions require imminent, concrete harm that cannot be remedied by money damages. Business embarrassment before a product launch does not meet that standard. And the technical validity of the safety claims? Caleb asked. That's not before the court today. The injunction hearing is about whether they have the right to silence you, not whether you're right about the system. Those are different questions. She paused. But I'm going to make sure Judge Castillo knows that a signed technical report from Dr. Patricia Voss exists, that an FTC inquiry is underway, and that the public safety dimension of this dispute is not incidental. She closed her folder. Caleb, inside this courtroom, let me do the talking. If the judge asks you a direct question, answer it precisely and stop. Understood. How are you? He thought about the question. I'm ready, he said. The Vertex Link legal team was represented by a senior partner from Hargrove, Sterling and Associates, a man named Douglas Crane, who was somewhere in his early 60s, silver-haired, with the practiced smoothness of someone who had courtrooms for 3 decades and had learned that quiet authority was more effective than volume. He had 2 associates and a junior partner with him. Sharon Adler had Raymond and Patricia Voss. Caleb sat beside Sharon and looked straight ahead. Judge Castillo entered, established order, and got to work quickly. He was in his late 50s, compact and unsmiling, with reading glasses that he used constantly, and a manner that communicated, without any drama, that his time was limited and he preferred precision to eloquence. Douglas Crane presented Vertex Link's case in about 20 minutes. He was smooth. The IP argument was well constructed, leaning heavily on the language of the acquisition agreement, and on the contention that the architectural documents Caleb had shared with Kevin Marsh and the FTC were derivative of Vertex Link's proprietary technology. The irreparable harm argument leaned on financial modeling, projected investment impact, launch delay costs, market position damage, numbers that were large and clearly designed to make a judge feel the weight of the stakes. He said nothing about the safety concerns, not once. Judge Castillo noticed. When Sharon began her response, she led with the case law on IP and creator knowledge clear, precedent-heavy, specific. She established the distinction between software ownership and architectural understanding in language that was technically accurate and legally grounded, building her argument the way Caleb Siltz built BIM's, load-bearing first, everything else in relationship to it. Then she pivoted. Your Honor, I want to draw the court's attention to something that is conspicuously absent from the plaintiff's presentation. Vertex Link is seeking to silence a man who has raised a documented public safety concern about their platform, a concern supported by a signed technical report from Dr. Patricia Voss, a credentialed distributed systems architect with 26 years of experience, and a concern that is currently under active review by the Federal Trade Commission's Office of Technology Policy. Douglas Crane was on his feet. Your Honor, the validity of Mr. Morgan's technical claims is not before this court. It is relevant to the question of public interest, Sharon said without raising her voice. The plaintiff is asking this court to issue an injunction that would prevent a private citizen from speaking about a safety concern involving public infrastructure. The court has an obligation to weigh the public interest in that calculus. Judge Castillo held up one hand. Silence. He looked at his papers. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the documentation. Sharon had provided the technical report, the FTC inquiry notice, the timeline of suppression. Mr. Crane, he said, Your client received a written safety concern from Mr. Morgan and responded within 72 hours, not with a technical review, but with a cease and desist communication from a law firm. Is that accurate? Your Honor, the response was to protect the company's legal interests. I asked if the timeline was accurate. A beat. The timing is approximately accurate, yes. And the employment action against Mr. Morgan, the administrative leave from his position at Harrington's. When did that occur? I'm not certain of the 3 days after his safety communication was sent, Sharon said, which is in the documentation Your Honor has before you. Judge Castillo looked at the timeline. He looked at Douglas Crane. The injunction request asks me to silence a man who raised a safety concern on the basis of an IP claim that your own acquisition agreement appears to undermine before a product launch that is currently under federal review. He took his glasses off. Mr. Crane, I need you to help me understand what irreparable harm your client is actually facing. Specifically, that a denial of this injunction would not allow to be remedied in subsequent proceedings. Douglas Crane had been in courtrooms for 30 years. He recovered smoothly. But Caleb, watching from beside Sharon, had learned over 6 years of reading rooms how to read the moment when a performance and a position diverged. The words were still polished. The argument was still structured, but the certainty behind it had changed. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Judge Castillo did not rule from the bench. He said he would have a written decision by end of business by 5 p. Then I filed out of the courtroom. In the hallway, Sharon Adler was measured. He's not going to grant it, she said. The IP argument has holes he could see clearly. The harm argument didn't survive his scrutiny, and the public safety dimension I could see him weighing it. Judges don't like being used as suppression tools. But we don't know yet, Raymond said. We don't know yet, Sharon agreed. Go eat something. I'll call when I hear. Raymond took Caleb to a diner 2 blocks from the courthouse. They sat in a booth, ordered food they ate, mechanically, and talked about things that weren't the case. Raymond's younger son, who was applying to colleges. Emma's A on the space race project. A conversation they had once had, in the first year of Freight Path, about whether the company would survive to see its 3rd birthday. I wasn't sure it would, Raymond said. Neither was I, Caleb said. But you kept selling it like you were sure. That's the trick, isn't it? Raymond turned his coffee cup in his hands. You act like you believe it, until you actually do. Does that actually work? Sometimes. A pause. Sometimes the believing comes first and the acting follows. And sometimes, he looked at Caleb steadily, sometimes a person just actually believes. Without any tricks, without any performance. Just knows he held Caleb's gaze. That's what you've had through this whole thing. You've known from the beginning. Not hoped, known. Caleb was quiet. I built the system, he said. I know where it breaks. That's not belief. That's information. I'm not just talking about the system. Caleb looked at him. You knew this was worth doing, Raymond said. You knew it the morning you sent the email. Before the law firm letter, before the video, before the lawsuit, before any of it. You sent that email because you knew, and everything after that has just been the rest of the world, catching up to what you already understood. Caleb thought about sitting at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning with the engineering documents open and the forum post on his screen and Emma asleep in the next room. He thought about sending the email. He thought about what it had felt like, not brave exactly. Not dramatic, just necessary. The way fixing a structural flaw is necessary. Not optional, not heroic. Just what you do when you understand the weight that other people don't see. She made a mistake, he said. Vivian? She looked at me and saw a waiter. She thought. He stopped. Organized the thought. She thought what powerful people always think when they see someone working a service job. That the job defines the person. That if you're carrying plates, you have nothing else. No leverage, no knowledge, no standing. And she was wrong about all 3. She was wrong about all 3. Caleb's voice was even. Not angry, not triumphant, just factual, in the way engineers are factual about the behavior of systems under pressure. And the thing is, she would have been fine if she'd just been wrong. People are wrong all the time. But she didn't just think it. She acted on it. She got me fired. She released the video. She filed the lawsuit. She kept escalating. because she couldn't conceive of the possibility that she was wrong about who she was dealing with. Raymond was quiet. That's hubris, he said. Old-fashioned Greek tragedy hubris. Yes. And you know what happens to people who operate from hubris when they're wrong about something structural. Caleb looked at him. The structure corrects them, he said. Raymond almost smiled. His phone buzzed. They both looked at it. Margaret Ossie, FTC. Raymond answered, put it on speaker, and set it on the table between them. Is Mr. Morgan with you? He's here. Good. A pause. In that pause was the specific weighted quality of someone who is about to say something that matters and knows it matters. I'm calling to inform you that the FTC's Office of Technology Policy has completed its preliminary review of Dr. Voss's technical report and the supporting documentation provided by Mr. Morgan. We have determined that the public safety concerns are sufficiently substantiated to warrant formal action. Caleb was completely still. We have issued a formal request to Vertex Link Communications for an immediate voluntary delay of the Meridian platform launch, pending a comprehensive independent safety review. That request was delivered to Vertex Link's legal team 45 minutes ago. They have 24 hours to respond. If they decline, another pause. We have prepared an emergency petition to the relevant federal court to compel the delay. That petition is ready to file. Raymond exhaled. It was a controlled sound. The sound of someone who had been holding their breath for 3 weeks. Miss Ossie, Caleb said. His voice was steady. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. This is the kind of thing we exist to handle. I'm sorry it took this path to reach us. A beat. You should know the petition, if we file it, will name you as a material witness to the technical findings. Your role in the original architecture will be part of the public record. That's fine. I thought it would be. She paused one more time. The court hearing the injunction? We're waiting on the judge's decision. End of business today. I hope it goes the right way, she said. And in her voice was something that was not quite personal, but close to it, the particular quality of someone who has been doing serious work for a long time, and is capable, occasionally, of feeling the weight of a single right outcome. I'll be in touch. She hung up. Raymond and Caleb looked at each other across the diner table. Raymond picked up his coffee. There it is, he said. Caleb nodded. His phone buzzed. Sharon Adler, he answered. Judge Castillo issued his decision. Her voice was professional-level controlled, which, for Sharon, meant something significant was underneath it. The injunction is denied, full denial both prongs. He wrote that the IP argument fails to establish the plaintiff's right to restrict independent architectural knowledge held by the original creator, and that the harm argument does not meet the irreparable harm standard required for injunctive relief. A pause. He also wrote. Her voice shifted slightly, the professional control cracking just enough. He also wrote, and I'm quoting directly, the court is not unmindful of the public safety dimension of this dispute. A party seeking to silence a safety-related communication bears a particularly heavy burden. That burden has not been met here. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Thank you, Sharon, he said. Don't thank me. You gave me real material to work with. A pause. What's next? The FTC issued a formal delay request to Vertex Link 45 minutes ago. Silence on the line. Then how long do they have to respond? 24 hours. And if they say no, emergency petition. Federal court. Another silence shorter. Then it's almost over, she said. Almost, Caleb said. He hung up. He looked at Raymond. Raymond looked back at him. Two men in a diner booth, coffee going cold between them, who had sat together in a rented office 20 years ago and built something that was still 15 years, and several corporate transactions later, the foundation of a billion-dollar empire. Call Emma, Raymond said. She's in school. Send her a message. Tell her. He stopped, thought about what to say. Tell her careful worked. Caleb took out his phone. He typed, careful worked. Talk when you're home. He hit send. He put his phone face down on the table. They sat. Outside, Chicago moved the way it always moved, loud and cold and indifferent to the specific gravity of what had just happened. Inside a diner booth between two men who had once believed in something enough to build it from scratch, and who had, each in his own way, spent 15 years paying the cost of that belief. Vertex Link's legal team responded to the FTC's delay request at 11:17 the next morning. They declined. Their response, 3 pages of careful corporate language, asserted that the FTC's concerns were based on unverified technical claims, that the platform had undergone extensive internal safety testing, and that a voluntary delay would cause irreparable financial and reputational harm to the company and its investors. It requested a formal meeting to present Vertex's own technical documentation in response to Dr. Voss's report. The response, its face, the kind of document that powerful companies produce when they have decided that the cost of defiance is lower than the cost of compliance. Margaret Osei called Raymond at 11:45. They declined. "We expected that," Raymond said. "Yes, we're filing the emergency petition at 2 p.m. Federal Court, Northern District of Illinois. We're asking for an emergency temporary restraining order on the launch, pending a full technical review. What are the odds?" A pause. "We have a signed technical report from a credentialed independent expert. We have the FTC's formal safety finding. We have a documented history of the company attempting to suppress the safety communication. And we have—" She paused again, and in the pause was something that sounded almost like satisfaction. "We have the original creator of the architecture, who has documentary proof of his role, willing to testify. So the odds are good. The odds are appropriate to the evidence," she said, "which is what you want them to be." Raymond called Caleb. Caleb was at home. He had been at home all morning, not anxiously, not frantic, but present. Organized, focused in the quiet way that was his particular mode when he was in the center of something important. He had the documents spread on the kitchen table again, but differently this time. Not reviewing, preparing, organizing the sequence of evidence in the order that told the story most clearly, because he understood that what was happening now was not just a legal proceeding but a narrative, and narratives, like systems, worked best when their structure was honest and their sequence was right. He listened to Raymond's update. He asked the questions that needed asking. Then he sat for a moment. He said, 2 p.m. The hearing will likely be tomorrow morning. Emergency TRO requests move fast. I know, Caleb. This is it. Whatever happens in that federal courtroom, that's the last piece." Caleb looked at the kitchen table, the documents, the graph paper, the pencil note. He thought about something Emma had said 3 days ago. "There isn't a version of this where she wins, Dad. There isn't." He thought about whether he'd believed it when she said it. He thought about whether he believed it now. The FTC had found. The injunction had failed. The federal petition was filing in 2 hours. 3 days until the launch. One hearing standing between the truth and a system that would hurt real people. He thought about 26-year-old Caleb in a rented office, building something careful and true, putting the structural slack in the right places, writing in pencil on graph paper. This is not a margin issue. This is structural. He thought about 33-year-old Caleb choosing Sarah over the company without hesitation, without regret, because the hierarchy was clear. He thought about 41-year-old Caleb standing in a dining room with a wine bottle in his hand, setting it down slowly and saying 4 words to a woman who had looked at him and seen nothing. "Mock me one more time." He hadn't known in that moment exactly what he was promising, but he had known he was promising something. "I believe it," he said. "What?" Raymond asked. "Nothing. I'll talk to you tonight." He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table in the midday quiet of the apartment that he paid for with the money he earned by carrying plates for people who didn't see him, and he waited for Emma to come home. At 3:15 he heard her key in the door. Backpack first. Shoes off at the door. She looked at him and read his face the way she had learned to read it, the precise, attentive, inherited way that children read parents who carry things quietly. "Tell me," she said. He told her, all of it. The FTC ruling, the injunction denial, the federal petition, the hearing tomorrow. Everything. In the clean, ordered way. He organized everything that mattered load-bearing first. Everything else in relationship to it. When he finished, Emma was very still. Then she said, "So tomorrow, and if the judge grants the TO, the launch is delayed. There's a full safety review. The system gets fixed before anyone gets hurt. And if he doesn't, then we have 2 more days, and we find another way. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Dad, yeah. She's going to be in that courtroom tomorrow. Or her lawyers are. Her lawyers are. Probably Douglas Crane again. And she'll know, by the end of tomorrow, whether she won or lost. Yes, I want to be there, Emma said. Caleb looked at her. Emma, I know I can't testify. I know I'm 10. I know I'm not. She stopped. Steadied herself. I want to be there when she finds out. I want to be in the room when the judge decides. Because her voice was very quiet now. Careful. The way she got careful with the things that mattered most. Because she made it about me. She put me in the middle of it when she said what she said at that dinner. She used me as a weapon against you, and I want her to see. She stopped again. He waited. I want her to see that it didn't work, Emma said. That's all. I just want her to see that. Caleb looked at his daughter. He thought about what Sarah would say. He thought that Sarah would probably say yes. Okay, he said. You can come. Emma nodded, once firmly, the way she made decisions. She went to the kitchen, got 2 glasses of water and brought one back to him. They sat together at the kitchen table. In the apartment, that was exactly enough, and no more, and outside the Chicago wind came off the lake, the way it always did, honest and cold and indifferent to the small, precise, enormously important things that were happening inside. 1 left, 1 hearing, 1 decision. And whatever came after it, Caleb Morgan had already done the thing that mattered most. He had refused to stay invisible. The federal courthouse on South Dearborn opened its doors at 8:30. Caleb and Emma arrived at 8:45, with Raymond beside them, and Sharon Adler 2 steps ahead, already moving with the focused momentum of someone who had done this enough times to know that the space between the door and the courtroom was where preparation either held or didn't. Emma had dressed herself carefully that morning without being asked. Not formally, she was 10, and Caleb hadn't suggested anything but deliberately. Her good navy sweater, her hair pulled back the way her mother used to wear hers, something Caleb was certain Emma did not consciously know she was doing. She carried nothing except the small, quiet seriousness she had been carrying all week, worn now like something familiar rather than heavy. In the elevator, Raymond crouched down slightly to her level. How are you doing? I'm good, Emma said. I'm ready. You know you don't have to do anything in there. Just sit. I know. She looked at him steadily. That's enough. Raymond looked at Caleb over her head. Caleb looked back. There was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said. The courtroom was not the same one as the injunction hearing. Federal court had a different weight to it, higher ceilings, more formal silence, the particular gravity of a room, where consequential decisions had been made for a very long time, and the walls had absorbed some of that consequence. The Vertex Link legal team was already seated at the plaintiff's table when they came in. Douglas Crane was there, flanked by his associates. Beside him was a man Caleb didn't recognize, younger, technical-looking, the kind of person you brought when you needed someone to dispute engineering claims on the spot. Vivian Sterling was not in the room. Caleb noted that. Filed it. Patricia Voss came in 2 minutes later and sat in the gallery beside Raymond and Emma. She had her document case. She nodded at Caleb, once the quiet nod of a person who has said everything necessary and is now simply present. Sharon leaned close to Caleb. The FTC is represented separately. Today Margaret Osei is here as a government witness. The hearing structure is straightforward. The FTC presents the safety finding. We present the technical and documentary case. Vertex Link responds. The judge asks questions. Emergency TRO standards are different from standard injunction. The court weighs likelihood of success on the merits, irreparable harm, balance of equities, and public interest. How does our case look on those 4? On public interest alone, this is the strongest TRO application I've made in 20 years. She paused. We're going to win this, Caleb. She said it, the way Patricia Voss had said. She'd put her name on the report not for comfort, but because she believed it and thought he deserved to hear it plainly. He nodded. The bailiff called the room to order. The Honorable Sandra Reyes entered. She was in her early 60s, with the settled, unhurried authority of someone who had presided over complicated things for a long time and had developed, through that experience, A very reliable instrument for detecting when something was real and when it wasn't. She sat. She looked at the room. She began. Margaret Osei presented the FTC's case first, and she did it with the precision of someone who had spent the last 48 hours making sure every word was exactly the right word. She laid out the safety, finding clearly the technical report, the simulation results, the infrastructure categories at risk, the projected impact of a cascade failure on 40 million people across 6 major metropolitan areas. She did not editorialize. She did not dramatize. She stated findings, presented documentation, and answered the judge's questions directly and completely. Judge Reyes asked good questions. Technical questions that indicated she had read the materials before the hearing, which meant she had been up late because the materials were substantial. She asked about the simulation methodology. She asked about the threshold conditions required for cascade failure. She asked about the timeline between Caleb's safety communication and Vertex Link's legal response. Margaret answered each one. When the FTC's presentation concluded, Sharon stood. She presented the documentary case in the sequence. Caleb had organized the original architecture, the creation, the sale, the ownership chain, the modification, the suppression. She let the timeline speak for itself, the way good evidence always should, without interpretation, without commentary, simply in order, letting the pattern emerge naturally for anyone paying attention. The pattern was not subtle. Then she called Caleb to testify. He took the stand. He was aware, peripherally, of Emma in the gallery, her navy sweater, her hands folded in her lap, her complete stillness. He was aware of Raymond beside her, and Patricia and Margaret Osei in her seat at the government's table. He was aware of Douglas Crane at the opposing table, and the technical expert beside him, and the absence of Vivian Sterling in the room. He was most aware of Judge Reyes, who was looking at him with the particular attention of someone had said this witness was worth paying attention to. Sharon walked him through it, his name, his background. FreightPath Systems, co-founded with Raymond Cho at 26 years old. The architecture he had designed, what it did, why it worked, what engineering principles it was built on, the sale, and why he had made it. He said Sarah's name plainly, without performance, in the matter-of-fact way that real grief produces in people who have carried it long enough. He said it, and moved on, because the point was not to ask for sympathy. The point was to establish that his decision to sell had been personal and voluntary, and had nothing to do with the company's value. He talked about recognizing his own architecture in the Meridian platform. He talked about what the modification had done to the Cascade Prevention Protocol, carefully, precisely, translating complex engineering into language that was specific without being inaccessible. He talked about the email he had sent and what had followed. He was direct, he was organized. He did not hedge and he did not embellish. When Sharon finished, Douglas Crane stood for cross-examination. Crane was good. Caleb had expected him to be good. He spent the first 10 minutes trying to establish that Caleb's knowledge of the Meridian architecture was theoretical rather than specific, that without access to Vertex Link's internal technical documentation, his claims were inference, not fact. Mr. Morgan, you've stated that you believe the modification to the load balancing protocol undermines the cascade prevention system. Isn't it true that you've made this claim based entirely on publicly available documentation? The publicly available specifications contain sufficient architectural detail to identify the modification and its structural implications. Yes, but you haven't seen Vertex Link's internal test results. I don't need to. The failure I've described is a mathematical consequence of the architectural change. Internal test results conducted under standard load conditions would not reveal it, because the failure only manifests under peak demand conditions that those tests don't simulate. That's an assumption. It's a logical consequence of the architecture. An assumption requires uncertainty. This has no uncertainty. Crane shifted. Mr. Morgan, isn't it true that you sold your intellectual property rights to the FreightPath architecture 14 years ago, meaning you have no legal standing to characterize Vertex Link's implementation of that architecture? I sold the software implementation rights, not my understanding of systems I designed. not my knowledge of engineering principles I developed, not my ability to recognize a structural flaw in a derivative system. A pause. A retired bridge engineer doesn't lose the ability to identify a dangerous bridge design because he sold the blueprints. Judge Reyes looked up from her notes. Crane tried 2 more angles and found both of them held in way. Caleb answered precisely, stopped exactly where his answer ended, and did not offer anything beyond what was asked. He had learned this years ago from watching Raymond in negotiations. The person who controls the length of their own answers controls the room. Eventually, Crane sat down. He didn't look defeated. He looked like a man who had been in enough courtrooms to know when the ground had shifted beneath him and who was now recalibrating. Judge Reyes looked at Caleb. Mr. Morgan, I have one question that I want to ask directly. Of course. You had the option at multiple points in this process to seek financial compensation or credit for your role in the original architecture. You didn't do that. You sought a delay of the launch. Why? The courtroom was completely quiet. Caleb thought about the question. He thought about Emma at the kitchen table, asking if he was scared, and his answer about the difference between scared and careful. He thought about the pencil note on graph paper. He thought about 40 million people. Because the money and the credit aren't the point, he said. The system is dangerous. If it goes live, people get hurt. I'm the person who can demonstrate that close enough to make someone listen. So I'm the person who has to do it. A pause. That's not complicated. That's just what you do when you know something that matters, and you're the one who knows it. Judge Reyes looked at him for a moment. Then she made a note. Then she looked at Douglas Crane and said, with the settled finality of someone who had made her decision several minutes ago, and was now simply completing the procedural record, I've heard enough. She ruled from the bench. She granted the emergency temporary restraining order. The Meridian platform launch was stopped, effective immediately, pending a full independent technical review to be completed within 30 days, overseen by a court-appointed panel that would include independent systems engineers selected by the FTC. She cited 4 grounds. Likelihood of success on the merits of the public safety claim, given the credentialed technical evidence presented. Reparable harm to the public interest if the platform launched and failed as described. The balance of equities which weighed the financial cost to Vertex Link of a delay against the human cost to millions of people of a cascade failure, and found it was not a close question. And the public interest, which she described, briefly and without drama, as the clearest factor of the 4. She also noted in language that Sharon would later describe as unusual for an emergency TRO ruling, suggesting the judge had felt strongly enough to put it on record that the timeline of events in this case raised serious questions about whether Vertex Link had deliberately suppressed a safety communication, and that those questions would be addressed in subsequent proceedings. Douglas Crane requested a stay pending appeal. Judge Reyes denied it without leaving the bench. The room absorbed the ruling the way rooms absorb consequential things quietly, with a slight shift in the quality of the air, as if the atmosphere itself had registered that something had changed. Caleb sat at the table beside Sharon and felt the ruling settle into him the way important things settle, not like an explosion, but like a weight being removed from a specific place. Slowly, the slow relief of pressure that has been so consistent. You had stopped noticing it as pressure and had started experiencing it as just the way the world felt. He turned to Sharon. Thank you, he said. She shook her head slightly. You did this. He turned to the gallery. Emma was looking at him. Her expression was the most composed thing he had ever seen on a 10-year-old's face, composed and clear and steady, and underneath it, visible to him. Because he knew every register of her face better than he knew anything else in the world. A relief so complete it looked almost like peace. He stood. He walked to the gallery railing. She stood, too, and he reached over the railing, and she leaned into him, and he held her there for a moment. Not dramatically, not for long, just long enough for both of them to feel the weight that had been redistributed. Careful worked, she said into his shoulder. Careful worked, he said. Raymond had both hands pressed flat on the gallery bench in front of him, looking at the table, and his jaw was working slightly the specific, Involuntary movement of someone keeping something large under control. Patricia Voss sat very straight, hands folded in her lap, and when Caleb looked at her, she simply nodded once. The same nod as before the hearing, and it meant the same thing. Everything necessary has been said. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Douglas Crane passed them without speaking. His associates were on their phones. The technical expert was already gone. The Vertex Link legal team moved quickly, with the purposeful motion of people who needed to be somewhere else immediately, which was always how it looked. When a well-resourced position had just collapsed, and the work of managing the consequences was beginning. Margaret Ossie stopped to shake Caleb's hand. 30 days, she said. The independent review will be thorough. But based on everything we've seen, Dr. Voss's simulations, your original documentation, I'm confident in what it will find. And then the platform either gets fixed properly or it doesn't launch. Either way, it doesn't launch broken. She held his hand a moment longer than a standard handshake. What you did here matters, Mr. Morgan. Beyond this case, there are people who will never know they were protected today. 40 million of them, approximately. They'll never know your name. That's fine, Caleb said. She studied him for a moment. Yes, she said. I believe it is. She walked away. Raymond put his arm around Caleb's shoulders, the easy, lateral grip of a man who had known another man long enough that the gesture required no comment. Lunch, he said. Somewhere, actually. My treat. You always say your treat. I always mean it. Emma looked between them. Can I get pasta again? You can get anything you want, Raymond said. Can I get 2 things? You can get 3 things. Emma considered this. That seems excessive, she said. But okay. 3 weeks after the hearing, the independent technical review panel issued its preliminary findings. They confirmed Patricia Voss's analysis in every material respect. The cascade prevention protocol was structurally compromised. Under peak demand conditions that occurred, on average, 11 times per month across the metro market TACE in Meridian's first phase deployment. The system would fail. The failure pattern matched the simulation results precisely. The panel's report used the word critical 4 times in its executive summary. Vertex Link's board of directors placed Vivian Sterling on administrative leave, pending an internal review of how the safety concerns had been handled, how the engineering team's internal warnings had been escalated or not escalated, and by whose decision and when. The answer, as it emerged over the following weeks, through the kind of careful, grinding institutional investigation that doesn't make dramatic headlines but changes things in permanent ways, was, the warnings had been escalated. They had reached Vivian Sterling's desk. She had reviewed them and authorized the launch anyway, calculating that the risk of delay exceeded the risk of failure. She had been wrong about the math. She had also been wrong about the man carrying her wine. Caleb read about the board's decision on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the kitchen table before Emma was awake, with his coffee and the quiet that was, in his life, the most honest part of the day. He read it once. He closed his laptop. He didn't feel what he might have expected. To feel not triumph, not satisfaction, not the particular vindication that people imagine you must feel when something this large goes the right way after this much cost. What he felt was quieter than any of those things. Something closer to completion. The specific feeling of a closed loop, a structural flaw identified, corrected, held to account. The work was done, not perfectly, not cleanly, not without cost, but done. Emma came into the kitchen at 7:12, hair uncombed, Chester under her arm in the uncomplicated way she maintained even now. At 10 years old, because some things are worth keeping without apology. She looked at him. She read his face the way she always read it. It's over, she said, not a question. The main part, yes. She's out? Administrative leave. The board is investigating. Emma sat across from him and looked at her hands for a moment. I don't feel bad for her, she said, working it out, honestly, the way she worked out everything that required honesty. I know maybe I should, but I don't. You don't have to feel bad for her. She had a choice. She knew about the warnings. She chose the money over the people. A pause. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. Caleb looked at his daughter. Yes, he said, it is. Emma looked up. Do you feel bad for her? He thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. because Emma always asked questions that deserved seriousness. "No," he said, "I feel something, but it's not what she would call it, and it's not what I would have expected." He looked at his coffee cup. "I feel sorry for the version of her that decided people were tools. For however long ago that decision was made, and whatever it cost her to make it and keep making it." He looked back at Emma. "That's a very lonely way to live. Whatever else she has, the money, the power, the room full of people who laugh when she laughs, she built it all on the assumption that she was worth more than other people. And that assumption," he stopped. "You can't build anything true on that. Eventually the structure tells you the truth whether you want to hear it or not." Emma was very quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom would have said something like that. I know. Most of the good things I say come from her." Emma smiled small, private, real. "What happens now?" she asked. "For you, not Vertex Link. For you." He thought about it. "The settlement discussions are starting," he said. "Sharon thinks there'll be a significant acknowledgement of the original architecture credit and some financial recognition. Not what it would have been worth if I'd stayed, but something real." "And the job, Harrington's?" Dale called last week. "The administrative leave was rescinded. I can go back." Emma looked at him carefully. "Do you want to go back?" He had been thinking about this question for 3 weeks. Not anxiously. Not in the way he thought through problems that didn't have good answers, but the way you think through a choice when all the options are genuinely yours for the first time in a long time. "Not permanently," he said. "I think it's time to do something different." "Like what?" "I've been talking to Raymond. There's a small technology company, early stage, the kind of thing FreightPath was at the beginning. They need someone who understands how to build reliable systems. Someone who understands what it actually costs when infrastructure fails. Engineering again? Consulting to start, part-time, while you're in school." Emma looked at him with a particular expression, the head slightly tilted one, that meant she was deciding something. "Mom always said you were the best engineer she ever met," she said. She said it to people, not just to me. She'd say, "My husband is the best engineer I've ever met, and I've met a lot of people." She used to make you embarrassed. She did. She was right, though. She was usually right. Emma picked up Chester from where she'd set him on the table and looked at him with the sad expression for it, as if Chester might have something to contribute. "I think you should do it," she said. "The consulting. The engineering." She set Chester back down. "I think it's what you're supposed to do. Not because the waiter thing was bad, you were good at it. And it was real. And you did it for the right reasons. But because she organized the thought, the way she organized all her important thoughts, carefully, looking for the exact words. Because you know what it means when something fails. You know it all the way down, and not everyone knows that. And the people who don't know it sometimes make the decisions that Vivian Sterling made." A pause. "Someone who knows better should be in those rooms." Caleb looked at his daughter. He thought about Sarah reading to an infant Emma from whatever book she was teaching, because she believed stories mattered before you understood them. Here was the proof. Here, sitting across from him, with Chester on the table and her hair uncombed, and the absolute unperformative seriousness of someone who had been taught by the way people around her lived that some things were worth saying clearly. Here was the proof that Sarah had been right. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you'll do it? Okay, I'll do it." Emma nodded firmly. "Good," she said. "Now can you make eggs? I have a test first period and I need actual food." 6 months later, Caleb opened a small restaurant. It was not a grand gesture. It was not a statement. It was a practical decision made by a man who had spent 6 years in food service and understood, from the inside, what it looked like when a workplace was built on the assumption that some workers were worth less than others. The restaurant was small, 12 tables, a short menu, a staff of 8. He hired people the way he had always evaluated systems, not by their credentials or their polish, but by their reliability, by whether they showed up when they said they would, by whether they treated the person beside them the same way they'd treat the person above them. The food was good, the place was honest. On the wall near the entrance, in plain type, without any frame or ceremony, "Everyone deserves respect before they prove anything." He still consulted 3 days a week, working with the early stage company Raymond had connected him to. sitting in conference rooms, and sometimes on video calls, looking at architecture and finding the places where structural slack had been traded for speed, where the load-bearing elements had been misidentified, where a system looked right until the conditions changed. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. He was just the only person, for a while, who had known that. Emma turned 11 in the spring. She invited Priya and 3 other friends to the restaurant for her birthday, and they sat at the big corner table and ordered everything, and were loud in the specific, uncomplicated way of children who are exactly where they're supposed to be. Caleb watched from near the kitchen doorway. He thought about the dinner at Harrington's, the private dining room on the 14th floor, the wine bottle in his hand, and the room full of powerful people, and the woman who had looked at him and decided he was furniture with a heartbeat. He thought about setting the bottle down. He thought about turning around. He thought about 4 words spoken to the back of a room. Mock me one more time. He hadn't known in that moment what he was starting. He had known he was starting something. That had been enough. Emma looked up from the corner table and caught his eye across the restaurant. She grinned. Not a complicated grin. Not weighted with anything that had happened or anything that might happen. Just the grin of a girl who was 11 years old, at her own birthday party, in her father's restaurant, with her best friend on one side and a plate of pasta on the other, and everything for right now, in this moment, exactly as it should be. Caleb Morgan looked at his daughter and thought about what he had built. Not the restaurant, not the architecture, not the case that stopped a dangerous system from going live and protected. 40 million people who would never know his name. He thought about what he had actually built, the thing that had begun the night fights at in a rocking chair and read to their infant daughter from whatever book she was teaching, because she believed stories mattered before you understood them. And that had continued through 6 years of early mornings and school pickups and homework at the kitchen table and the quiet, daily, unglamorous work of raising a human being to know the difference between what things cost and what they were worth. He thought about Emma saying, "I'm not scared." He thought about Emma saying, "There isn't a version of this where she wins, Dad." He thought about Emma at the kitchen door. You always know what the right thing is. You just sometimes take a while to decide you're allowed to do it. A man's value is not measured by his bank account. Sarah had taught him that, and he had spent 11 years teaching it to Emma, not with words but with the way he lived with every choice he had made. That chose honesty over convenience, dignity over bitterness, love over power. The restaurant filled with the sound of 11-year-olds laughing. Caleb Morgan looked at his daughter and understood completely, and without any remaining uncertainty, that the most important thing he had ever built was not a routing architecture that had become the foundation of a billion-dollar empire. The most important thing he had ever built was standing across the room from him, grinning, with pasta on her fork and her mother's eyes, and a laugh she had inherited from both of them, and a character that was entirely, unambiguously, irreducibly her own. Money can build an empire, but a man who knows what he's worth and raises a daughter who knows it too, has built something that no amount of money, no law firm, no lawsuit, no edited video, no administrative leave, no courtroom, no billion-dollar platform, and no billionaire in the world can ever take away. That is the only legacy that lasts. And Caleb Morgan had built it carefully, honestly, and completely, one day at a time.